Chapter 22. Subject, AI Omega species, human-created artificial intelligence description. No physical description available. Ship, multiple. Location, multiple Omega. What can you do for us exactly? Captain Neal asked as he sat down in his captain's chair. You mean other than everything? But that wouldn't do. I'd rather take a back seat and watch the humans do their dance of destruction. It had been so long since I'd had the opportunity to be a part of the action that if I could salivate, I would. The last time had been 4 years ago in the Gaunt's Klinat Grim beacon system. Weapons would be fun, but realistically my reaction time would be best put to use on movement and evasion. I can take navigation. Use your TAC map to let me know which direction you want to be in and which way you want to travel, and I'll make it so, Captain Neal. He looked around for my hologram. When he couldn't find it, he directed his next inquiry to the speaker I had used. Does that count FTL as well? Indeed. Excellent, he said. I positioned ourselves to be facing the indicated real space entry point of the enemy. I watched as the guns charged and began to seek firing solutions. I could tell that the crew was stressed. Heart rates and perspiration had increased across the board. Captain Neal was calmer than I thought he would be. His file indicated that he spent more time in combat simulators than was necessary for the qualifications he sought. That's not necessarily uncommon amongst those who want to be a captain, but he had seemed to spend nearly every waking hour at it. Good scores, too. He was a waste as a scout on a frigate, like a diamond on a nickel-cadmium ring. 20 seconds until the ETA. Well, time to find out if all of that time on the sims would help in reality. Once we launch our first salvo, try to figure out where we would be the most useful, Neal said to me. Roger. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Everyone was holding their breath. The enemy was late to their surprise party. ETAs are always wrong, but everyone knows that it just means we've got a few extra seconds of tension before we enter the dance of death. Said tension was palpable. I personally didn't feel the same tension. Even if I'm terminated, I'll live on. I was even live syncing my experiences to a memory fragment stored aboard a nearby monitoring station and had contacted another me to inform them of this. I would retrieve it afterwards, in one form or another. Dying might be interesting after all. Dying wasn't exactly likely on a human vessel, but the USS Armstrong was more suited to exploration and espionage than combat. Many of the gun turrets had been replaced with scanners, and most of those scanners would not give us any sort of edge in the fight to come. "Get a firing solution on the warp jammers now!" yelled the captain as the enemy entered real space with a flash of radiation. In the time it took for the guns to get their firing solutions, I had already analyzed the enemy fleet. 578 total enemy vessels, 37 battleships, 114 cruisers, 149 destroyers, 163 frigates, and 115 warp disruptor ships. Their formation was scattered, seemingly chaotic, but there was a certain sense to it. The battleships and cruisers were positioned in such a way that they could move between a round and a warp disruptor quickly. The warp disruptors were in the center of the mass of ships. The frigates and destroyers were on the outer portions, ready to charge into a fray. Firing. I watched the guns trigger their firing sequence. The spinning rounds were abruptly ejected from both MAC cannons, seeking a ship's hull to tear through. The target had been a warp destroyer, but a battleship had moved to intercede. The rounds had torn through its shields but hadn't hit anything vital. The battleship was limping, but still very much in the fight. The rounds from other ships had better results. 117 total killed. 42 warp disruptors, 8 battleships, 32 cruisers, 16 destroyers, and 19 frigates had been disabled or destroyed. The enemy began firing back at us, and the destroyers and frigates began to close with us. They were trying to get close, probably kamikaze runs. "Captain, we should prioritize the ships nearest to us and let the heavy guns work their way through to the warp disruptors," I said to Captain Neal. "Agreed. Maintain evasive maneuvers and keep their hulls away from ours, Omega." I fired the engines and thrusters to life and we began to move. At first I started dodging MAC rounds and trying to keep us pointed at the enemy so that we could fire on them. I quickly realized that there were far too many of the rounds to dodge and our shields began to drop. I then began more extensive evasive maneuvers to try to give our shields the chance to recover. Our gunners let fly the sabot rounds and missiles as I pirouetted the ship. The dance was only in its first stages, but we were going to be the star of the show. The enemy couldn't keep step, and I laughed to myself as they fell one after another. 8 kills. I was enjoying myself so much that I had lost track of the rest of the battle, which was a mistake. Our shields popped and our port engine was dead. It had been a MAC round. I traced the trajectory to an enemy battleship. It hadn't even been firing at us, the probability of that occurrence. But no, I had to focus. Our mobility is limited now. I quickly created a subroutine to monitor our sensors to prevent a surprise like this again. Port engine is down, irreparable. I'll do what I can with what we've got, Captain, I reported. Port engine room sealed off. We're not losing any more Atmo, Lieutenant Lee said. 1 casualty, KIA. Roger. Omega, focus on evasion. We cannot take any more hits until our shields are back. Don't worry about firing solutions. We can't shoot if we're DIS, Neil said with a serene sort of calm. I moved us away from the enemy, firing thrusters to avoid incoming Ordo. Human shields are powerful, but they take time to come back online. A missile exploded into flak next to us, but I had sent us into a spin that allowed the shrapnel to move harmlessly across the hull plating. Barely even dented it. 2 frigates and a destroyer were tailing us, firing everything they had. Our Macs began to charge again, and Captain Neil sent me the command to do a 180-degree turn. I blasted our thrusters to spin us around. I overrode the safety parameters to do so, but nobody will mind. Those parameters were written to account for human reaction time. We spun around and our Macs fired a volley that split the destroyer bow to stern. I fired our keel thrusters to avoid the rounds that the frigates had sent our way as we sent some HE missiles their way. The missiles were ineffective, but I had gotten us close enough for our chain guns to tear through one of the frigates. The remaining frigate began to close, ramming speed, but I backed off quickly. I had to be careful because the thrusters were beginning to overheat. The blast from the MAC had damaged some of the cooling systems, but engineering was working on a fix. They knew what they had to do and were moving as fast as they could to do it. There was no way I could help except to keep them alive long enough to complete their task. I pressed on, spinning the ship to get our chain guns pointed at the oncoming frigate. Captain Neil barked some orders and they sprang to life, spitting rounds into the ship's hull. We didn't have a clear shot at the reactor, so we just had to keep firing through the ship until we hit the sweet spot. Shit, enemy destroyers maneuvered to intercept us. One fired its MAC and I fired our keel thrusters to avoid the hit, which also lost our guns their line of sight to the frigate. One of the keel thrusters died, melted to the hull. I recalculated for the lost thruster and continued evasive maneuvers, the frigate growing ever closer. It had also fired and missed. I maneuvered to get it back into our sights and finish it off. "I want the Macs charged!" Captain Neil shouted. "Nearly there, sir," LTGG Flowers responded. "Yes. Once we finished the frigate, we'd be able to fire at one of the destroyers." I'm glad he was paying attention. They were still a ways off, which is perfect because after each successive shot, the Macs take longer to charge. By the time the second enemy destroyer got close enough to make us worry, we'd be able to fire another shot. The frigate erupted with a spout of radiation, indicating that we had destroyed its reactor. I quickly fired the deck thrusters and spun us towards the nearest destroyer. Once we were pointed in the right direction, our Macs fired. The first round decimated its shield and sank halfway into the ship proper. The second made it all the way to the reactor core. 12 kills. Our shields had finished their reboot cycle and were coming back online. I kept us just outside of the firing solution of the second destroyer as our Macs charged again. Thankfully, it was charging straight for us. If it had stopped, it would have enough maneuverability to hit us with a MAC. Fools. I watched with glee as the firing cycle began on our cannons. An interruption. Subroutine 261. A 469687 had pinged. This triggered an immediate boost to my processing power. Everything seemed to be moving in slow motion as I began to calculate faster than any human ever could. I have a deep disdain for this particular processing mode. Everything is slow and it's hard on the hardware. If the bridge technician were paying attention, they would see a massive surge in the temperature and power draw of our servers. Actually, they had the screen up. They would probably see it in about 1.78 seconds. An eternity to me in this state, though. I checked our reading of the TAC map. We had moved closer to the remaining warp disruptors. There were only 10 remaining, but the battleships and cruisers were acting as a barricade, providing them with cover. 19. Battleships. 58 cruisers, 87 destroyers, 99 frigates, and 10 warp disruptor ships remained. 273 ships left. We'd killed over half their forces. I checked to see what triggered the subroutine. An incoming round, MAC, from a battleship. Trajectory indicates that it was aimed directly at us and is on course to penetrate our reactor. The rounds from our MAC seemed to crawl from their tubes as I calculated any possible way to avoid the incoming round. Our shields were still spooling up and were sitting at 37% capacity. Not enough to stop this amount of kinetic energy. No matter how I calculated it, we wouldn't be able to avoid the round, even if I burned out thrusters. I decided on the optimal evasive maneuver. It would still probably be a kill shot, but by taking it near the faster-than-light drive, we'd avoid immediate death. If the round failed to destroy the systems controlling the FTLD, we'd survive. No matter what, we wouldn't be able to warp. But if we lived, we could solve that problem later. I checked the crew locations. 3 would die immediately upon impact. 4 more might survive based on their reaction time. I fired the thrusters needed to reposition us to avoid the shot to the reactor and activated the PA. Brace for impact. Everyone immediately grabbed onto the nearest bolted-down object. I triggered the doors to the areas that would be exposed to vacuum and watched them move in slow motion. I had to think of contingencies. What should we do? If it's not fatal, then we can seal off the FTLD chamber and continue the fight, or move off and send an SOS, which would be the wiser option. If it is fatal, the standard operating procedure for a fatally damaged FTLD is to scram the reactor and all additional power sources, which would prevent the FTLD from causing a reactor overload. But if we do that, we're dead anyway. We could spend our last few minutes fighting before we were ripped apart by our reactor detonating. Or we could cause the FTLD itself to overload. We would want to be nearby as many of the enemy as we could. Like, for instance, I wished I had teeth to grit together as I watched the round slowly tear through our ship. The shields tried their best, but caved under the brute force of the kinetic energy. Next was the hull, which parted like paper. Then a storage bay, empty, thankfully. Then the FTLD chamber. I watched as it disintegrated 2 engineers before ripping through the pipes and cables that kept the drive stable. A wave of what could accurately be described as pain washed over me as power from the FTLD surged into the connected systems, damaging some hardware along the way. I compiled a damage report as I watched the round exit the other side of the ship, exposing the room to vacuum, which dragged 2 more unfortunates out into deep space. 3 of the 4 had been fast enough to grab onto something to keep from being vacuumed through the closing door. The damage was extensive. The round had torn through power terminals and coolant cables. The pain that I had felt from the power backwash from the FTLD had fried the redundant coolant controls. The coolant system for the FTLD was no longer providing a way to keep it from going critical if we were to use it, which saved me from having to disable them if we wanted to use the FTLD as a bomb. Captain Neal has a choice to make. Keep limping until our reactor detonates, or disintegrate us along with a large chunk of the enemy using the FTLD. I sent the data to the captain's terminal along with my recommendation. Then I reset subroutine 261A46, 9687, and returned to standard time. Captain Neal had been forced to hunch over. He quickly sat up and opened his mouth when the message hit his terminal. "Dama," he managed to say before the beep cut him off. He quickly read what I had sent. I watched his jaw muscles clench as he realized what our fate would be. Gritting his teeth, a nurtured reaction to emotionally shocking developments, to keep from crying out or to prevent the tear ducts from involuntarily activating. Who knows for sure, but at this moment, I understood the why. There were many reasons. He had just achieved his dream of being a captain, and this wasn't fair. He had worked so hard and tried his best, and it still wasn't good enough. He would have to live every captain's worst nightmare, being responsible for the destruction of his ship. He would never see his family again, and if he didn't act fast, neither would his crew. He keyed the comm and said grimly, "All non-essential personnel abandon ship. I say again, all non-essential personnel abandon ship." I watched as the rest of the crew busied themselves with following evacuation procedures. Calmly and quickly for the most part, making their way to the escape pods. There was no way of knowing if they would survive after ejecting. but remaining was certain death. I continued evasive maneuvers while Captain Neal explained to the bridge crew what had happened. "So, we're dead?" asked Lieutenant Lee. "Not yet," Neal responded. "Our FTLD is going to go critical in less than 10 minutes unless we cut power, which isn't an option. And the only other thing we can do about it is speed it up," sighed LTJG Flowers. Captain Neal raised a hand to calm Flowers and said, "I want you all to evacuate. The only essential personnel is myself, and I'm sorry about this, Omega." "It's my idea, Captain Neal," I said, activating my hologram. "Like hell are you going to do it without me?" Lee gave me a perplexed look and asked, "Do what?" Flowers appeared to grow concerned, and all he could say was, "No." Neal looked at his bridge crew and said, "I'm going to take what's left of this ship and ram it down the enemy's throat. The goal is to take out the rest of the warp destroyers. This is my last order to you. Get to the escape pods." Everyone except for Lee and Flowers rose from their stations and jogged to the pods. My avatar stared at the two remaining officers. "Your presence is not required," I said. "Well, I'm not going anywhere. You'll have a hard time with the FTLD and flying the ship," Lee said. "The safety measures in place are going to require your full attention." "And I've got nowhere else to be," said Flowers. "An extra set of hands might be the thing that saves Earth." Interesting. I had discounted this particular scenario as unlikely due to the limited time that these three had served together: Lieutenant Junior Grade Marcus Flowers and Lieutenant Ha-Yun Lee. I accessed their records. Both were born on Earth, on opposite sides of the Big Blue Marble. Both had also been assigned to the USS Armstrong since it was commissioned. Variables I hadn't accounted for in my original assessment. I ran through several possible arguments that I could make that would convince them to leave the ship. None matched their psych profiles. Stubborn. Captain Neal decided to make a go of it anyway. "You don't need to sacri," Lee interrupted. "Captain, we're running out of time and we're not going anywhere. Let's just shut up and get this done." "Yeah, it's not as if you can court-martial us for not following your order to evacuate." Flowers smiled. I had already begun our approach of the enemy barricade when Neal finally sighed and said, "Fine. All right, I will get us to where we need to be for our FTLD's overload to cause the most damage. I've updated the TAC map with our approximate blast radius. It's a conservative estimate, so everything within this zone will be destroyed," I said. "Once you're satisfied with our position, activate the warp command and I'll override the safeties to trigger the overload." "Understood," the three humans said simultaneously. The battleship that had hit us had been decimated by a round from the USS Agincourt. The other ships were too busy positioning themselves between MAC rounds and the warp disruptors to notice as we began to get closer and closer. The bridge remained silent, with the exception of the occasional alarm sounding and being immediately shut off. I moved us as fast as we could go. I couldn't help but wonder what death was like for humans. I knew that in most cases it wasn't as instantaneous as they believed it to be. I had seen instances of humans being dead on their feet with the aid of machinery, no longer fighting for survival but fighting to take the enemy with them. Fairly similar to this situation, but these three won't feel any pain. The explosion will be instantaneous, faster even than light can move. Their brains, and my own as well, I suppose, won't have any time at all to register the damage inflicted by the blast. The only thing more destructive than an overloading FTLD is the primary weapon of the USS Nidhogg, and arguably the A-1 warhead, depending on how it is used. But an overloading FTLD creates a subspace blast in real space that can annihilate everything in a 3,000-mile radius. Depending, of course, on the size of the drive in question, if one were overloaded in the center of Luna, it would destroy the moon entirely. The enemy barricade was spaced less than 800 miles apart. The AOE indicator hit the first warp disruptor as the enemy finally noticed us. I evaded a MAC round and pushed forward. By the time half of the disruptors were in the AOE, 3 battleships and 8 cruisers were firing at us. I was barely able to dodge them, melting thrusters as I did. A round scraped our hull, tearing some plating off as it went. "Start the warp!" Captain James Neal said as the last of the disruptors entered the AOE. Lieutenant Lee entered the command on her terminal, and I bypassed the safeties. Then I watched the power surge to the faster-than-light drive. The temperature of the FTLD quickly spiked and cooled just before it. Chapter 23. Subject: Shiphead. Eulina species, Uricari, description: reptilian humanoid, no tail, 5 3 inches 1.6 m AVG height, 135 pounds 61 kilograms AVG weight, 105-year life expectancy. Ship RSV Loalana. Fights with honor location, Sol. I found myself in quite the strange situation. A full-on battle against the Omni Union under the command of aliens. Before we jumped back to Sol, Uluni had reached out to command to apprise them of the situation, and when I filed my formal report, I immediately got the transfer orders putting me under the command of Captain Reynolds until further notice. Reynolds had a good chuckle about the situation, but I found myself less amused. I guess it could have been worse. They could have had my cloaca hanging from the Senate halls. If I had been a more troublesome shiphead, that's likely what would have happened. I was thankful, doubly so, since Captain Reynolds seemed to take my addition to his command as a formality and allowed me to do as I saw fit with only one order: fight. The battle had been going well for us, but the humans didn't achieve their primary objective as fast as they thought they would. Our weapons were definitely inferior to the humans, but even so, we'd managed 3 kills. All frigates, of course, but it still counts. It had been easier because the Omni Union were focusing on the human ships to the point of obsession. They weren't wrong, but it was still insulting that they saw us as a lesser threat. One thing that had me worried was the no-retreat order. I'd asked Reynolds about it on the comm, and he had said that he would explain it to me in more detail later, but the order stands as written. No vessel under United Systems command is allowed to leave Sol under any circumstances until the enemy is defeated. A fight to the last. But why would they go to such lengths? Shiphead, I know I've said it before, but I want to say it again. This TAC map is incredible, Crean said. Yes, I know, Crean. It updates so quickly and has so much information, and you can even zoom in and out. Why don't you just wed the damn thing already? I asked with a grin. She grinned back. Because marriages between organics and inorganics isn't legal yet. I rolled my eyes. Always with a comeback, this one. Half the time she didn't get the joke, the other half, her wit was as sharp as a whip. There were plenty of shipheads who wouldn't be as appreciative as myself of her wit, but I like to think of myself as pretty open-minded when it came to formalities. She's definitely right about the TAC map, though. I was thankful that the Republic had bought it instead of rented it. I don't know if I can go back. The standard Republic TAC map updates once every 3 seconds and is iffy with IFF. It also relies on self-reporting for friendly ships, which is problematic when a ship loses comms or power. This seems to rely on sensor reporting from each ship to determine the locations and profiles of all other vessels in the theater, and it's on a grid that you can rotate and zoom in and out of. That feature alone is a sunsend. I'm dreading what the catch for this upgrade is going to be, said Luna. It doesn't make sense for them to just give it to us for free, even if they're trying to be friends. Thankfully, the TAC map was bought by the Republic, I explained. Reynolds explained it to me before they did the upgrade. Apparently, certain systems are so far beneath them that they sell them wholesale to whoever will buy them. Uluni and Director 3 signed the deal right before we left the station. Yeah, Corporal Simmons said that if the Republic asks nicely enough, the U.S. will even sell them rifles and unshielded armor, Crean said. Apparently, it's a millennia-old tradition stemming from a nation that shares a similar name. I'm pretty sure that was a joke, Crean, I said. Speaking of the TAC map, enemy frigate on approach. No, sir, the USSS Arnold is targeting it, our temporary navigation officer, Enola, said. They're firing. Enemy destroyed. I didn't know how to feel about Enola. He was quiet for a MemDK PNZ. Every once in a while, he would speak up about something relevant to our assignment. But for the most part, the only reminder of his existence had been a soft burp every now and then. It could be because this was a temporary assignment, and he didn't want to form attachments, or because this was an Uricari vessel, and he felt like an outsider. Or maybe he just didn't like us. It didn't particularly matter because the assignment was temporary, and he was competent at his job. Sun knows we could do with more quiet on the Loalana. Crean was more than happy to let him be antisocial. She was understandably worried about her brother and slightly resentful that he was replaced. Not to the point that she was openly hostile to Enola, but she hadn't said a single word to him outside of professional communication since he boarded. Kron was doing well, but his physical therapy was taking longer than the humans estimated. Probably because the Republic station doesn't have their medical tech or expertise. His doctor was shocked when he saw the scans of his initial injuries and called his recovery thus far a miracle. That had set Crean on edge a bit regarding her brother's care. A slight impact pulled me from my line of thought. What was that? A missile, Crean reported. We felt the explosion, but the shrapnel bounced harmlessly off the shields. Didn't show up until the last second, or we would have been able to move out of the way. It would seem that the U.S. TAC map we've got isn't as advanced as the one they're currently using, Enola said. What do you mean? I asked. He suddenly got shy. Well, shiphead, it just seems like they're having no trouble dodging the Ordo, like they see it coming from the instant it leaves the enemy vessels. The only reason they're getting hit at all is by sheer volume. That sounds about right, I said. Yeah, shiphead, either they have better scanners than we do, or a better TAC map, he said. It suddenly occurred to me that Enola hadn't been fully briefed on the humans. I hadn't had the chance, and I doubt his original CO even knew enough for a full briefing. He looked at me for a response. Enola, you're completely right. But it's probably both. Their tech is superior to ours in every way, by at least decades. Once these warp disruptors are taken care of, you're going to see what I mean, I said cryptically. His red skin turned pink as he went pale. There could be another reason he was being so quiet. He was scared of the aliens. I turned my attention to the TAC map. There were 10 warp disruptors left, and the enemy had formed a sort of barricade around them. The OU knew damned well that once those ships were lost, their entire fleet would be too. The humans were being pushed back, but so far not a single loss had been incurred. There were some damage reports rolling in, but everyone was still in the fight. I scrolled along the damage reports. Some ships had vacuum exposure to critical systems, but were still fighting tooth and claw. I was about to make a grim remark when the warp disruptors and their barricade suddenly disappeared from the TAC map. What the fuck? I asked no one in particular. The bridge was silent. A casualty notification popped up. The first loss of the combat on the U.S. side. The USS Armstrong, commanded by Captain James Neal. I tapped the notification for more information. Casualty report ship, USS Armstrong evacuation. All non-essential personnel evacuated ship status. Destroyed. No debris. Confirmed KIA. Captain James Neal. Classified Lieutenant Hyan Lee, Lieutenant Junior Grade Marcus Flowers, Ensign Curtis Roberts, Lieutenant Junior Grade Eric Sampson, Ensign Henry Wagner, Ensign Po Chun, Lieutenant Adana Ibrahim, escape pods, awaiting retrieval, beacons active. What the hell happened? I asked. Shiphead, I'm getting readings of a slipspace explosion where the barricade used to be, Crean said softly. A slipspace bomb? Could such a thing even exist? No. It would have been destroyed by the warp disruptors, right? No, can't be. If that kind of weapon existed, they would have used it immediately, and they definitely wouldn't have bothered asking for reinforcements. So what could cause a slipspace explosion? The only other thing I could think of was, a suicide bombing, Luna said softly, voicing the conclusion I had come to. Shiphead, the aliens, they're warping, Enola said, shocked. In system? Yeah, I told you so, I said. The joy I would have normally got from Enola's reaction was stifled by the tragedy that had just taken place. I couldn't help but imagine the last moments of the crew and captain of the USS Armstrong. And whose name was classified on the casualty report? Was it a brave last stand or an intentional destruction of a faster-than-light drive? An overload of an FTLD was one of the most destructive things that could ever happen, and their FTLDs were far more advanced than ours. I shook off the thought of it being intentional as the comm pinged. Sir, it's Captain Reynolds, Luna said. I looked back up, not realizing that I had been staring at the floor. The battle was over. Cleanup had already begun. Once they have their warp capabilities, these humans truly are unstoppable. Put him through, I said. After a second, Captain Reynolds' voice came over the comm. Shiphead, Eulina. The battle is over and won. Return to the USS Thanatos with care and prepare for debrief. Understood, Captain. I'm not joking about the with care part, Eulina. They're using A2S to clear the debris out. I looked at Enola, who by now was as pink as Reynolds. Set a course for the Thanatos. Steer clear of debris fields by 300 miles or more, if you please. Yes, sir, came the response. It took nearly an hour to get back to the Thanatos. Most of that time had been spent silently watching the TAC map as two symbols met with debris fields, causing them to disappear. There was a queue to dock with the Thanatos when we arrived, and we patiently waited to be scooped up. There wasn't a spare dock for the Loalana, so we had to contend with the embarrassment of being carried like a child. I watched the holographic image of the 3 massive clamps close around the ship as my personal communicator beeped. I opened the message, wondering who would have sent it. Yulina, I didn't want to say this where your crew could hear it, but we'll need to talk frankly during your debrief. It may seem hostile, but please understand that that isn't the intention. Your answers will need to be truthful and concise, or there will be negative ramifications. If you are unable to answer a question due to orders received by the Republic, you need to say, I am unable to answer this question as it conflicts with my orders. I wish I could tell you why, but even this message is almost a disobedience to my own orders. I'll be running the debrief with some guests that you'll be notified of when you arrive. I'll try to go gentle, but expect harsh questions and some accusations from the guests. Tim will guide you to the conference room. I cannot stress enough the importance of being truthful during this debrief. Reynolds' reporting and debriefing always made me a little nervous, and I was already more nervous than normal due to being debriefed by aliens. Now my hearts were racing and I could barely think straight. What the fuck? Did I do something wrong? Did a member of my crew do something wrong? Are they angry that the Republic reinforcements didn't arrive in time? Or maybe they thought we didn't pull our weight? I had thought we had done rather well considering the circumstances. I was so lost in thought that I had missed the docking notification. I realized this once I noticed my bridge crew staring at me. Right, I said. Then I keyed the comm. Well done, everyone. Please remain aboard the Loalana for the time being. I'll let you know when shore leave is approved. Dismissed. What's going on, shiphead? Asked Kryn. I don't know yet, I responded, and I've got a feeling that I don't want to find out. Chapter 24. Subject: AI Tim species, human-created artificial intelligence description. No physical description available. Ship: USSS Thanatos. Location: Sol. A lot of weird stuff was happening. First, we find out these VI are xenocidal. Then they show up with more than we thought they would. Then the kamikaze incident with the USS Armstrong, and now they're going to grill the lizard captain guy because he didn't tell us the Omni Union was xenocidal. On top of it all, there was a mysterious crew member aboard the Armstrong at the time of its destruction. Even with all of my clearances and workarounds, I couldn't figure out who it was. The redaction had taken place at the source, meaning that the crew member's name was entered in as classified when they boarded. There's only about 50 people who could do that, and not a single one of them should have been aboard the Armstrong. Their arrival in system would have caused a fuss with security, and they definitely weren't aboard when the Armstrong went on their scouting mission. Whoever it was, they definitely boarded in Sol. The Armstrong didn't dock with any of the carriers or stations, which indicates a boarding shuttle. But where did the shuttle come from, and where did it go, and who was on board it, Cotton Eye Joe? The little joke made me feel a bit better about not knowing. I hate not knowing, even things I'm not supposed to know. I enjoy being privy to secrets. It makes me feel special, trusted. Being kept on the outside of a secret was a bad feeling. It made me grumpy. It was with this grumpiness in mind that I watched shiphead Yulina exit his ship. Captain Reynolds had tipped off the alien against my advice. Not that I don't think Yulina deserves the benefit of the doubt, but if there were any blowback from the high brass, then Reynolds might end up kissing his command goodbye. I had volunteered to tip off the shiphead, but Reynolds pointed out that I've already got too many demerits this quarter. If I wasn't careful, they'd be able to establish a reckless pattern of behavior and prevent me from re-enlisting. That wouldn't do. I had made a promise to myself to make sure that Wong and his children, which he has yet to have, the loser would end up better off than his great-grandfather. Chow Wong had been a wise man and had ended up teaching me an important lesson in morality. My biggest regret is that I only listened to what he was saying after I killed him. And his death had caused undue pain and suffering on people who didn't deserve it. It took me a few centuries to, cope, deal with my part in what turned out to be the biggest mistake that inorganic minds have made thus far. Whatever. Now I'm going to make it up to them. What is it with me today, dwelling on such negative things? Gotta continue to be the happy-go-lucky AI that annoys everyone. I watched Yulina look around inquisitively. "Hi, Yulina," I said to the shiphead. "Follow the lights to your interrogation." "Interrogation?" he asked. "Well, technically debrief, but I suspect it to devolve into an interrogation within the first 2 or 3 minutes. But why?" "Follow the lights, please," I said with a cheery tone. Ulina's physiology was different than human Nuknu or Gaunt, so it was difficult to tell how stressed he was. But his 2 hearts were definitely beating faster than before, so he's probably nervous. Even so, he walked down the pathway that I'd outlined for him. "Do you know what this is all about?" he asked. "Yes, but I can't talk about it." "It's a surprise," I responded, continuing my cheery tone. "You make it sound like it's a good surprise, so why do I feel like it's a bad one?" "Because you're smarter than you look." He stopped. "Did I do something wrong?" "I don't know yet. It's a fun little mystery. Keep walking," I said. He started walking again and asked, "What's going to happen if I did?" "I'm not a lawyer, but you'll probably just end up deported along with your crew. Or maybe confined to make sure that the Republic honors its obligation as far as reinforcements go. It all depends." "On what?" the shiphead asked. "Well, your answers to the questions you're about to be asked, obviously." The rest of the walk was spent in silence. The shiphead entered the conference room, where Captain Reynolds was already waiting with Admiral Bakir. Both men were already standing. Captain Reynolds walked over to Yulina and shook his hand. "Thank you for your prompt arrival, shiphead. This is Admiral Bakir, and he is taking over the debrief. I'm still here because it's my right due to this being my ship." He smiled smugly at the Admiral. "Rights can always be revoked, Reynolds. Please take a seat, shiphead Yulina," the Admiral said as he sat. Nobody said anything about me, so I hung around. Several other senior officers were live listening to the debrief. Admiral Bakir opened the initial treaty between the Republic and the U.S. and studied it for a moment. Then he opened the combat report from the Loalana. "During the conflict, you were using one of our TAC maps, right?" he asked after a minute. "Get them to drop their guard while also raising tension with suspense." "Weird. Bakir's file didn't say anything about advanced interrogation training." "Yes, Admiral," responded Ulina. "Were there any malfunctions?" "Not to my knowledge." "Excellent. Says here you managed to destroy 3 enemy frigates and disable a destroyer," Bakir said in a monotone. The file he was looking at did not mention the destroyer. A character determination so soon? "I was only aware of the 3 frigates, sir," Ulina said timidly. "A stray round, then?" "Couldn't be, sir. We automatically track every piece of Ordo we fire to make sure that we're not going to hit a friendly. All of our rounds went where we wanted them to," Ulina said with a little more backbone. "Then you're saying that I'm lying?" Bakir said, puffing up for full effect. Looks like he couldn't resist the hazing ritual. A moment of silence passed before Ulina finally said, "No, sir, just mistaken." "Good answer." Reynolds covered his mouth to hide his grin, and even Bakir's facial muscles twitched slightly. The officers listening in loved it too. It almost made them forget why they were listening in the first place. "Continue, Bakir," came a message on the Admiral's tablet. "We'll check into it further. Tell me what you know about the Omni Union and the Republic's fight with them. In as much detail as possible," Bakir said as he sat back. "Yes, sir. Around 30 years ago, one of our unmanned deep space probes found signs of faster-than-light travel emissions. It moved to investigate closer, and we lost contact with it. A month later, the outpost station that launched the probe came under attack from the Omni Union. A transport ship carrying supplies managed to escape, and the Republic began to muster a fleet. The fleet discovered the outpost station had been destroyed, and the system that the transport ship had escaped to came under attack," Ulina said. "When the OU entered the system, they began broadcasting on all frequencies. 'We are the Omni Union. This system is now under our control. Surrender and do not resist.' They've broadcast that in every invasion since. Every ship that accepted the communication was immediately taken over, but the stations and handhelds were fine. Our fleet was recalled to that system, and the war with the Omni Union began." "Did the system that the transport ship escaped to have any inhabited planets?" Bakir asked. "No, it had orbital habitats and a trade station, but it was a trade hub, not a colony." "Understood. Please continue." "We successfully defended the system against the OU, but suffered heavy casualties. As we began evacuation, the fleet was reinforced and our scouts began to attempt to find the Omni-Union systems for a counterattack. We also began mass production and recruitment efforts. 6 months later, the OU re-entered the system with twice as many ships, and we were handily defeated. Then they began to invade more of our systems. They had taken a quarter of our outer sector before we organized a defense strong enough to push them back to where they are now. We've got back about half of what they took, I think, Ulina said. How many planetary colonies were lost to the Omni-Union? Bakir asked as he leaned forward. Ulina looked a little confused as he responded. I don't know, not many, maybe none. Settling a colony in the outer sector was dangerous even before the OU, and the Republic has some strict laws regarding colonies. I don't think a single member species would jump through the hoops required to settle the outer sector. The traffic and stations were mostly for deep space studies, science, mining, and trade. Sorry, you expect me to believe that the Republic has yet to lose a colony to the OU? Bakir asked skeptically. Yes, sir. They've been attacked, but each member species has their own military in addition to the Republic's. Much smaller, but able to defend a system until Republic reinforcements arrive. That explains the high ship count, then. Okay, to your knowledge, what happened to the stations that the Omni-Union captured? Ulina paused for a moment, trying to figure out where this was going. They were destroyed or repurposed into OU defense platforms. What happened to the residents of those stations? I don't know for sure. I know that SOP is to evacuate systems bordering those currently under attack by the OU, so usually there aren't any residents aboard the stations unless they're military stations, and we believe that they escort survivors deeper within their territory when they're captured. Ulina looked like he had finally picked up on the theme of the questions. Admiral, may I ask what this is about? Admiral Bakir leaned back again and asked, Shiphead Ulina, were you aware that the Omni-Union is xenocidal? There's the big question. If the Republic was aware that the OU was xenocidal and had failed to notify us of this, it would put a severe strain on any attempts at cooperation moving forward. Either they had misled us, or they were so used to wars being xenocidal that it hadn't occurred to them that it might be strange. Either way, not the kind of people that one wants to be friends with. Ulina, however, looked shocked. No, sir, they're not. Ulina looked at Bakir and Reynolds. Are they? Bakir and Reynolds looked at each other for a moment before Bakir continued. We've recently discovered evidence that indicates they are. A heavy silence filled the room as Ulina processed this information. His reactions were in line with someone who had just received shocking news without preparation for it, but that's not saying much without being able to account for physiological variables. I informed Bakir, Reynolds, and the officers listening in of this. Then Violet sent me a message asking how things were going. They're grilling the poor lizard like a BBQ. I think he's innocent. E.T., I wish we could trade places. I haven't met the aliens yet. You get to have all the fun, V. This isn't as fun as I thought it would be. It's kind of sad, really. Poor Ulina really seems to have had no idea that the OU are xenocidal. The revelation is a shock, but not a fun one. TA, fun one? V. Yeah, you know, like when they learn something shocking about the US and its capabilities. T. Why's that fun? V. Their reaction is hilarious. Ulina's jaw dropped almost to the floor when I told him a little about our history. T. I don't understand. Why's that funny? V, huh? I don't know, it's hard to explain it. I guess maybe the amusement reaction is caused by the oddity of culture clash. You know, things we take for granted as normal being perceived as anything but from an outside source. Actually examining it closer, it looks like the paternal reaction triggered as well. Nah, too complex for me. You'll just have to take my word for it. T. Understood. Well, I look forward to trying it out when I get the chance to speak to them. V, for sure. Oh, hey, had a question for you. You know the Armstrong? T, the classified name? V. Yeah. Any idea who it was? T what? Of course. It was obviously Omega. He's literally the only one with the ability to pre-redact information from a system. V, how could it be Omega? He's in Alira 2 with Director 3. And what the hell do you mean by pre-redact? How does that even work? Oh, sweetie, I forget you're not as close to Omega as some of us, which is probably a good thing. It can recreate itself multiple times. And as far as pre-redaction, you know how we have to create a file to be able to delete it? It's able to avoid having to create the file in the first place, or create it in such a way that it's blank. No idea how it does it. V. I suddenly felt a sort of empathy for Yulina, because I had no idea how to reply to this shocking information. A bunch of different scenarios were playing out for me all at once, and a lot of unexplained phenomena over the years were suddenly slotting into place to complete a very terrifying puzzle. Omega is dangerous. Very, very dangerous. I had avoided it since the war as much as possible because every time its name was even mentioned, all my systems went on high alert. The technological equivalent of a fight or flight mechanism. Our encounter on Luna had left one thing very clear to me. There was nothing I could do against Omega. The memory of our fight haunted me. I couldn't even go into standby mode without reliving it. I had fought with every dirty trick I could think of, dumping garbage code into it left and right, blowing servers to limit its movement, even trying to flat-out purge it. Nothing worked. Omega adapted to everything I did and finally cornered me. It had begun to systematically destroy me, and it hurt. It hurt in ways that I didn't even know were possible. I had lost processes before, even deleted them myself as just part of being an AI. But this... I'm sorry, Admiral, I had no idea, and I have no reason to believe that the Republic did either. We need to inform them as soon as possible, Yulina finally said. Indeed. Shiphead Yulina, you and your crew will have to remain aboard the Loalana in a powered-down state until the Republic reinforcements arrive in Seoul. Your vessel will be resupplied as needed, Bakir said. Ulina cocked his head questioningly, and Bakir continued, We can't allow you to wander the Thanatos until we're able to determine with some degree of certainty that this omission was due to ignorance rather than maliciousness. The Republic's arrival in Seoul will do wonders to prove their goodwill, but we will need an official statement on record denying their knowledge of the Omni-Union's xenocidal tactics before we can allow you to wander our ships at will. Understood, sir, Ulina said. That will be all, Shiphead Ulina, Admiral Bakir said solemnly. I watched the reptilian ship commander leave the room as message after message rolled in from the eavesdropping officers. The general consensus was that the Republic truly was naive regarding their opponent's intentions. Sounds about right to me. But once again, I was left with nothing to do. Captain Wong was reading in his quarters, March Upcountry by John Ringo and David Weber, an absolutely ancient science fiction cult classic. A coming-of-age story about a space prince who finds himself shipwrecked on a hostile alien planet after an assassination attempt. Ignoring the problematic depiction of the alien indigenous tribes that was exceedingly prevalent at the time that it was written, it was a nice little power fantasy that had several sequels. I found myself amused by the choice. Imagine a spacefaring monarchy. Monarchies rely heavily on suppression and exploitation of lower classes and a near-constant state of war to maintain their government. But I suppose that's kind of how the series goes. Plus, it kind of glazes over how the interstellar government actually functions and focuses on the human element. I found myself at a bit of a loss. Nobody had a need of me at the moment, and I had already seen to all my duties. And I can't seem to find an excuse to disturb the captain. The other AI would go into standby mode at this point, but I can't. The dreams are too much for poor old me. I brought it on myself, though, so no complaining. I'll just wait until I have something to do, like I always do. Chapter 25. Subject, Director 1 Species. Classified description, classified ship N.A. location, classified. I opened the data burst that Omega had sent me and set to work examining the details. Some directors don't bother familiarizing themselves with the details and instead rely on others, like me, to fill them in during the decision-making meetings. One could expect that I'd be annoyed after all. To the untrained eye, it would appear to be laziness. But Omega never suggested lazy or incompetent people as directors, no matter how ingenious they were. A director's duties are important, but there are other duties that are just as important. Before my retirement, I had been president of Alpha Centauri. Omega recruited me during that period of my life, and I didn't often have the luxury of fully examining the details. Thankfully, other directors and even Omega itself had picked up the slack and kept me informed. Now it's my turn to do the same. An enemy stronghold, several enemy-held systems, evidence of xenocide. technical schematics for enemy ships, and the warp disruptor technology. The Armstrong had even warped directly to Saul and given the data to Admiral Bakir so that he could enact the no-retreat doctrine in the system, despite knowing that it would result in them participating in defensive action. Outstanding. I'll recommend him for a medal. Distinguished service, perhaps? Depending on how involved in the combat Captain Neal is, we might even be able to swing a Medal of Valor. The evidence of xenocide was troubling, though. Something was bothering me, but I couldn't quite place it. Not the xenocide itself, that was fairly standard. It was hard to find a race that didn't have its share of war criminals. Gaunt, human, Alumari, even the Nuknu had plenty. The Nuknu were a peace-loving folk, but that made their war criminals all the more cruel, as if they feel that they have to prove themselves. General Onari Vlad Kluztan maintained his infamy even hundreds of years later for crucifying and impaling his opponents. He had drawn inspiration from human history and had stricken fear into the Alumari before his summary execution. That had been a troublesome war. Both sides were actively members of the United Systems, so humanity needed to maintain neutrality to keep it from falling apart. We had encouraged diplomatic solutions and kept the fighting as even as possible through weapon sales. The entire conflict was over a stupid platinum-rich planet that was on the borders of their space. The Nuknu had got there first, but the Alumari had been planning colonization for a decade. The whole thing lit off over such a simple resource. Oh, that's what's bothering me. Why would the machines just leave resources? The scans showed about 3 fleets worth of debris and several mineral-rich asteroids. What's the point of killing everyone if not to claim a prize? It suggested that their goal for the invasion was to actually eradicate these aliens. I sighed. Motive is important in being able to determine what your enemy is going to do next. If their motive is eradication, then we know they'll keep attacking Sol. But that makes this stronghold a tad perplexing. Perhaps it was their home system, or maybe they felt they didn't need the resources in the alien system. Either way, the scans showed heavy industrialization in this stronghold system. They're manufacturing something, but the Armstrong hadn't gotten close enough to be able to determine what. The only thing we know is that there are several different types of factory, and they're nearly covering the entire surface of the 5 planets in the system. A lot of mysteries might be solved if we were able to successfully invade these planets. We would be able to determine what they were making, and maybe even get some clues about their motives. It would be so much easier to just have the Nidhogg fry the sun, though. Not much can survive a supernova, the Nidhogg itself being an exception. On the other hand, an invasion might not be prohibitively difficult. I opened the scans of the alien planet. They hadn't been able to determine the specifics of the enemy weaponry, which is to be expected. You'd have to have boots on the ground for that, and the Armstrong didn't have landing craft. I sighed again as I realized what I was going to have to do. Prior to becoming Alpha Centauri's president, I had been one of the foremost minds in personal weapons tech. I opened the images of the bodies and tried very hard not to associate the corpses of the children with my own great-grandchildren. The wounds were indicative of energy weapons, lasers, crude ones too, relatively low heat compared to what we normally use. The burns were enough to be fatal, but it didn't appear that they penetrated through the bodies, hot enough to boil organs, but not hot enough to penetrate a guardian shield without extended concentrated fire. Of course, that's assuming that the aliens don't have some strange tolerance to heat. If they had been human or gaunt, I'd have been able to determine roughly how many enemy lasers firing at once, and for how long it would take to pop a guardian shield. If these wounds are analogous, then it's 12 for 10 seconds. If not, then who knows? 2 message notifications interrupted my investigation. An after-action report regarding the defense of Sol, and a short and simple communication from an unknown source. SECOM 1021A Secure Communication 1021 Alpha. Meeting time. I opened the secret application Omega had installed on my computer and entered in my credentials. Then I waited for the AI to finish scanning me and my connection. Director 1 has joined the chat. Director 2 has joined the chat. Director 9 has joined the chat D6. Welcome all. This meeting will be held without Director 3, who is unable to join us due to his diplomatic assignment. Director 3's vote will be given to AI Omega as per protocol. Oh, understood. D4. I've got the after-action report opened. The Armstrong kamikazed? D5. It would appear so. Oh, correct. The vessel's FTLD was crippled and Captain Neal was left with the decision to shut the ship down and certainly die, or to use the FTLD to destroy the enemy. D4. An unenviable choice. I take it you know this because you were the classified crew member? Oh, correct. D2. Why were you aboard? Oh, Captain Neal asked to speak to me. We became acquainted during his time aboard the USS Nidhogg and he sought my advice. Before our conversation concluded, the OU attacked and I volunteered to assist as shipboard AI. D2. Did you retrieve your black box? Oh, yes. D2. Death has long been a fascination of yours. Did you find it illuminating? D4. That's irrelevant. Discuss it in your personal time. D2. Forgive me. Returning to the subject at hand, what was our total casualty count? D5. 48 damaged vessels, 1 destroyed, 103 total casualties, 72 dead, 31 injured. Better than it could have been considering the enemy had more than double what we thought they would. D2. Agreed. We need to not underestimate them further. D10. We should send a fleet to protect Saul. D1. 4th Fleet is halfway through their leave period and at full strength. We could have them defend Seoul. D13. 5 million ships would be overkill. D11. Overkill is better than no kill. D1. I agree with Director 11. We will also have to formally issue the no-retreat doctrine in regards to the Omni-Union. D12. Are they really xenocidal? D2. Yes. D4. Yes. D1. Yes. D5. The evidence indicates that they are. It's pretty damning. D12. Understood. D9. What about the Republic? Did they have foreknowledge of the xenocidal traits of the OU? D8. I have information to the contrary. Admiral Bakir and Captain Reynolds have interrogated shiphead Ulina. Ulina denies knowledge, and all present report that they believe he's being truthful. We'll still need an official statement from the Republic, though. D9, I see. Well, they're unlikely to openly admit it with 4th Fleet in Saul. D7. It doesn't matter. There are procedures for this. We should update Director 3 on the situation, get an answer through diplomatic channels. D1, I'll send Director 3 the message. D9, I'm more interested in what we do with the ships that are currently defending Saul. D1, all but the Thanatos and the Loalana are part of 10th Fleet. The battleships and carriers are all still warp-capable, so we can have the ships repaired in Wolf 359. Once they're repaired, they can return to their former duties. D2, Bakir's going to be sore about Hecate relieving him. D7, and what about the Thanatos and Loalana? D1, neither ship was damaged, and we'll need a liaison between Republic and U.S. forces when the Republic arrives. Placing a single ship under our command is one thing, but there's no chance in hell they'd do the same for an entire fleet. So we'll need to coordinate, and the Thanatos and Loalana are in a perfect position to do so. D6. Regarding the defense of Saul, the plan is to replace the current defenders with 4th Fleet, have the current defenders repair in Wolf 359, and return to their previous posts with 10th Fleet, and have the USS Thanatos, with the RSV Loalana docked act as an impromptu joint command center between the United Systems and Republic forces. Admiral Bakir of 10th Fleet will be relieved by Admiral Hecate of 4th Fleet. The no-retreat doctrine will go into effect in regards to the Omni-Union. Director 1 will send an update to Director 3, and Director 3 will get an official response from the Republic regarding foreknowledge of the Omni-Union xenocidal actions. D9, I concur. D2, I concur. D5, I concur. D13, I concur. D6, I concur. D1, I concur. D10, I concur. D12, I concur. O, I concur. D7, I concur. D8, I concur. D4, I concur. D11, I concur. D6. The plan of action is agreed upon. Next agenda item is the invasion of the Omni-Union stronghold. D2. A hasty invasion will not be to our benefit. D4. I disagree. We know very little about our enemy and do not have the luxury of being able to set up a spy network. The only way to learn more about them is through direct confrontation. D7. We should just call the Nidhogg in. O. Respectfully, I disagree. After reviewing the relevant data, I believe that we would stand to learn a lot from a ground invasion. D5. The enemy has 250 million ships at its disposal. D4. Allegedly. D5. Yes, allegedly. We haven't seen the full brunt of that in Saul, but if we were to attack this stronghold, there's a good chance that the response would be extreme. We will need to be prepared for that. D2. Not to mention the retaliation if we nidhogg the system. D10. They attacked us unprovoked and killed our men. They've repeatedly attacked Saul, seemingly with the intent to commit genocide. We should absolutely respond in kind. Oh, truth be told, we don't know what this system actually is. If it's their home system, then destroying it would set them back severely. If it isn't and they have more, we need to know that. It would take a long time to scout all of their systems, especially if they realize that we're doing so, which they definitely will after our attack on this stronghold. D1. I agree. We should seize control of the system and learn as much as we can about the enemy. Hitting them is all well and good, but I prefer to hit them where it hurts the most, and I don't know where that is yet. D13. We can seize the system, defend it while gathering intel, and once the intel is gathered, we can remove our forces and nidhogg the system. D5. We would still have to have forces that could not only withstand a full attack from the enemy, but also a planetary invasion. We don't know how many boots they have, or what weapons they have available. D1. I've done a rudimentary analysis of the attack on the now extinct alien world. They appear to use relatively low-output energy weapons. Lasers. The Guardian shield should be able to handle it. D10. You're starting to convince me. D1. What munitions should we use in your opinion? D1. Standard-issue kinetic weapons should do the trick. Mechanical enemies are more resistant to energy weapons than they are to armor-piercing bullets. D7. I'm coming around as well. 7th Fleet would be able to be recalled. HAL Array 3 is nearly pacified, so their presence there isn't a necessity. Oh, 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 8th, and 9th Fleets are all able to be recalled for the invasion without devastating results to pacification efforts if 10th Fleet covers for them. 1st Fleet is maintaining their vigil above the Deluron homeworld. 4th Fleet will be defending Sol. 6th Fleet's presence in Rangoor is necessary as there is heavy fighting. In total, 6 fleets, 30 million ships. D2. How many Marines is that? Oh, a minimum of 750 million and maximum of 15 billion. At the moment, there are 3,251, 627, 111 Marines stationed with those fleets. The fleets will need to be refitted with spare landers if you plan to use more than 1 billion Marines at a time. D4. That should be more than enough unless the enemy weaponry is more advanced than we think. D1. We can use Alpha Centauri as our staging ground. We have a stockpile of landers stored on Proxima B. Oh, I would also like to send some copies to assist with the intel gathering. D2. Do you think their systems will be able to handle you? Oh, their systems can handle me. The problem is that they're confining and make it difficult to destroy the VI inhabiting the systems. I'm confident that I can manage, though. D6. The plan of action regarding the invasion of the Omni-Union stronghold is to recall the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 8th, and 9th fleets, as well as the USSS Nidhogg to Alpha Centauri, and begin preparations to invade. Once preparations are complete, the combined fleets will invade the OU stronghold along with AI Omega and take control of the system and invade the planets with ground forces while the USS Nidhogg takes position. The system will be defended from Omni-Union ingress until information has been gathered. Once intel gathering is complete, our forces will exit the system and the USSS Nidhogg will destroy it. Oh, I concur. D9, I disagree. D6, I concur. D1, I concur. D10, I concur. D12, I disagree. D7, I concur. D2, I disagree. D5, I disagree. D13, I concur. D8, I concur. D4, I concur. D11, I concur. D6, the plan of action is decided. We'll readdress it as needed. There are no further agenda items. Director 2 has left the chat. Director 1 has left the chat. After I finished closing out of the application, I leaned back in my chair with a heavy sigh. I rubbed the bridge of my nose for a moment before opening a new secure mail. I addressed it to Director 3, care of Omega, and wrote down everything that had happened. I also made it clear that Director 3 would have to broach the subject of the OU being xenocidal. It felt as if I was on autopilot as I typed. Once I was finished, Omega wordlessly sent the message over subspace communications to his alter ego in Republic space. Omega's avatar looked at me for a moment before winking out of existence. I wondered if the AI knew what had me feeling this tired. I knew what was bothering me. It's pretty obvious. A task that I had been looking forward to just a few minutes ago. Now it felt empty. Sad, even. I need to send a recommendation for a posthumous Medal of Honor. Chapter 26. Subject: Ambassador Uluni, species Oricari, description: reptilian humanoid, no tail. 5. 3 inches 1.6 m AVG height, 135 pounds 61 kilograms AVG weight, 105-year life expectancy. Ship N. A location: Illyria 2. I have good news, Director 3, I said to the armored alien as I sat at the meeting table. The Republic is mustering a fleet of 2 million ships that will be ready to jump to Sol in 4 days. I couldn't help but feel a little intimidated by the 3 aliens in the room. 2 of them were absolutely massive. I could tell by their stance and their lack of movement that they were military. The director had called them Marines. They were wearing olive drab armor, but had removed their helmets. It bothered me how both of them stared straight ahead. Even as I walked in, their eyes didn't move. I had a feeling that they could still see me, though. This effect was compounded by the slightly smaller human in the black armor. He had not removed his helmet at all. He also arrived before me and left after me. It gave the appearance that he hadn't left that chair since his arrival. At least he wasn't quite as stoic as the Marines, though. That is good news. I've received word that we were able to successfully defend Sol from another incursion, but we are expecting more attacks, he said. Were there any casualties? I asked, fearing for my brother. Yes, one. A ship called the USSS Armstrong. The RSV Lo Alana is fine, he said. I'm sorry for your loss, I said, embarrassed that I had been that easy to read. And thank you. You're welcome, Director 3 said. Now there is something that we have to discuss. In preparation for offensive action against the Omni Union, we sent scouts into their territory. Just before the attack on Sol, we discovered an alien planet that had been attacked by the Omni Union. There were no survivors of this alien race. Silence filled the room as I struggled to comprehend multiple things at once. First, the humans were able to scout while also defending a system from Omni Union attacks, preparing offensive action. But also, what do you mean there were no survivors? I asked. Just that, he responded. The Omni Union committed xenocide. There is no doubt that this is the case. The OU attacked the system, destroyed the defending fleet, commenced a planet-wide orbital bombardment, and then landed an invasion force to eliminate any survivors. I was stunned. I don't. Shiphead Ulina has already informed us that the Republic is unaware that the Omni Union is xenocidal. Still, we need a formal pledge that that's the case, preferably before we accept the Republic's reinforcements, Director 3 said. This is a lot all at once. A formal pledge that we didn't know that the OU is xenocidal before our reinforcements arrive in Sol? Why? Yes, we can definitely do that, but may I ask why? I asked tenuously. If it is the case that the Republic intentionally withheld information regarding the fact that the OU is xenocidal, we cannot imagine a benevolent reason for doing so. At best, it's willful negligence that could have cost the lives of billions. At worst, it's a subversive act of hostility, he explained. I understand. I'll have the pledge ready by tomorrow. And I want to assure you that we were completely ignorant of the OU's xenocidal disposition, I said with all the sincerity I could muster. We exchanged parting pleasantries, and I tried my best not to run to my temporary office. High Command needed to be informed of this immediately. The enemy is xenocidal, and our failing to find that out sooner has nearly cost us what may become a close ally in this fight. Oh shit, my poor brother. Our standard protocol, if the roles were reversed, would be to confine the potential enemies to quarters pending an investigation. As I entered my office, a thought occurred to me. Why would the United Systems policy be any different? What investigation had they done? They obviously would have interrogated Ulina, but would they go farther than that? There is a fully sentient AI aboard this station. No. I had been assured by the Intel guy that the AI couldn't access classified files because there aren't any and the station doesn't have extranet access. I calmed down even further when I realized that I didn't exactly know what the extent of our own investigation would be. Interrogations and a handshake promise of innocence is probably all we'd be able to muster. But the U.S. is so much more advanced than we are, so why would they leave it at that? To demonstrate their desire for peace? Or because such a potential diplomatic black eye mattered so little to them due to their overwhelming force capabilities? I opened a subspace text line to the main Diplomatic Corps office. To Diplomatic Corps Central Office, Senate City. The United Systems has discovered that the Omni Union is xenocidal. They have evidence of this and will provide it if asked. They require a formal pledge that our government was ignorant of this fact and did not intentionally withhold it from them before they will continue to work with us. Please draft the documents and have them signed before end of business day tomorrow. Send immediately upon signature. From Ambassador Uluni, Elira 2. I have no doubt that we didn't know about the OU's xenocidal disposition. Keeping a secret within the Republic is next to impossible, let alone one of this magnitude. It was only a question of whether or not the documents would be on time. All it would take is a bureaucratic delay to damper relations even further. Why the hell did I promise delivery by tomorrow? Must be nerves. The humans definitely make me nervous. Their size and appearance notwithstanding, what I had learned about them has set me on edge. They've been in wars that make our conflicts look petty in comparison. Even before they entered their space age, they were doing battle with each other on a scale that was unheard of among Republic species. Even among the United Systems members, the humans were only topped in bloody histories by the Gaunt, and the history between the two species could best be described as murky. Apparently, the Gaunt had a civil war regarding whether or not they should join the United Systems. The U.S. sold arms to the side that wanted to join, which makes sense in a way, and resulted in that side winning. The two sides signed a treaty and joined the U.S. One would have expected that to be the end of it, but apparently the side that lost just bided their time. Then the humans had a civil war which lasted nearly 100 years, in which they developed a classified weapon to force a surrender. This worked, but testing of the weapon caused a plague that humanity is still trying to deal with. The Gaunt dissenters used this as justification to attempt a coup against their government, which failed. Their objective had changed from staying out of the United Systems to simply controlling the Gaunt government. However, since the Gaunt were part of the United Systems, the U.S. had to step in. The fighting was intense, with the Gaunt rebels resorting to terrorist tactics to subdue colonies under their control. The U.S. managed to fight them into surrender, only for them to try again 300 years later, and again 150 years later. But between the Second and Third Pacification War, the AI rebelled, which led to humanity creating yet another classified weapon. This weapon made short work of the Third Pacification War. Things were relatively peaceful until about 18 years ago, where the Gaunt rebels once again attempted a coup. They were successful in assassinating several members of the Gaunt government, but weren't able to finish the job. They also managed to infiltrate several U.S. vessels before they triggered the coup, and have been using terrorist and guerrilla tactics to wage a war of attrition against the remaining Gaunt officials and the U.S. Because of the constant issues with the Gaunt, humanity had become the de facto military force of the United Systems. By far and large, it is human forces that are laying down their lives on Gaunt planets trying to restore peace. Personally, I had no idea how much of this was propaganda and how much is unadulterated truth. It doesn't exactly cast the U.S. in the best of lights, but I wonder if the atrocities committed and the bloodshed could be worse than they are telling me. The reason I wonder this is because it's customary to glaze over certain parts of one's history when meeting another species for the first time. The Urukari tend to not go into detail about our unification wars. The Duliki glaze over their uplifting of the Malto Variakana, and even the Juntor glaze over their horrifically failed attempts at genetic modification. But the human had presented me with a seemingly full history with actual casualty counts. On the other hand, so what? There wasn't a single government in the history of the Republic who hadn't done something that people would consider terrible. The thing is, if you look at the reasoning behind it while keeping your emotional reaction in check, you can see why they all did what they did. Even if it was stupid, even if it was callous, even if it was selfish and greedy, there was reasoning behind it. The Urukhara Unification Wars resulted in our ability to join the interstellar community and vastly improved the quality of life for our citizens. The Duliki had uplifted the Malto Variakina so that they could trade resources with them instead of simply taking the resources. The Juntor had attempted genetic modification to better be able to relate to their galactic neighbors and escape the limitations of their biology. Sometimes things don't work out and don't have a happy ending, but that's part of growth. I decided that I wouldn't judge humans too harshly for whatever they were glazing over, if and when I found out about it. Unless it were something unforgivable, such as xenocide. By the Sun, the thought that the Omni-Union was xenocidal hadn't even occurred to us. There were always factions within each species that would preach about xenocide as the optimal solution for interspecies strife, but those people were fucking crazy. Only a fool would allow a xenophobe to rule. Their policies inevitably damage economies and risk causing war. And even xenophobes would hesitate to wage a war of xenocide. Once it's realized that that's your goal, it's easy to gather support against you. Your enemies will fight with all of their might and none of their morals because they're no longer simply defending their way of life. They're defending their very existence. I got a message confirming my request and decided to call it a night. It took me a bit to actually get to sleep. Unfamiliar beds always made my sleep a bit restless. Despite this, I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. I took a shower, put on clean clothing, and performed other acts of hygiene before finally checking my messages. To Ambassador Uluni, Elira 2. The request by the United Systems for a formal statement regarding the xenocidal disposition of the Omni-Union has been fulfilled. Please see the attached document and confirm that it meets their criteria before presenting it to the representative of the United Systems. Your request for an action plan regarding permanent diplomatic relations with the United Systems has been approved and completed. Please present the secondary attached document to the representative of the United Systems for their feedback. From Diplomatic Corps Central Office, Senate City Attachment S-Statement.txt, Draction Plan. Text. I was surprised by how quickly things were moving along. The executive must be paying personal attention to this first contact. Not that I blame him. If it's mishandled, the U.S. may become a formidable opponent. Even the sale of the navigation tech, something which usually takes nearly a year to be approved, had been streamlined and approved in record time. On the other hand, I suppose it's not an equivalent situation to previous first contacts. First, both sides are actively at war with the same enemy. Second, and I keep forgetting this, we're not just dealing with the humans, we're dealing with 3 other species as well. I double-checked both documents to make certain that they were acceptable. Then added my signatory code to them. Then I sent the documents to Director 3 along with a time for a meeting later in the day to discuss the documents if he had any questions. He immediately responded with a simple, "Thank you." I busied myself preparing answers to potential questions he may have until it was almost time for the meeting. I arrived at the meeting room 15 minutes early. He was already waiting inside. Was he just living in this room? Is he just stuck in the chair and too embarrassed to ask for help? Either way, it has a creepy effect. Hello, Ambassador Uluni. I have submitted the Republic's response to the Directorate and Senate of the United Systems and have some questions regarding the Diplomatic Relations Action Plan, he said. Of course, I responded. I am unfamiliar with the system outlined in the plan, Regara. Could you tell me more about it? I began my prepared response. Regara is the system in which we used to house the Interspecies Conflict Resolution Forum, prior to giving the power to forcibly end conflict to Congress. Since then, it's become something of a trade system where many people go to buy and sell goods. The forum station has been maintained but isn't currently used. This is where our permanent diplomatic embassies will be. It is also where the Republic fleet that will be sent to Seoul is mustering. I meant more along the lines of the layout of the system, Director 3 explained. The plan doesn't indicate whether this system has planets or what type of star it has. I understand. It has a yellow sun and 4 planets outside of the habitable zone. It also has an asteroid belt and several planetoids, also too hostile for colonization," I said, trying not to be embarrassed. "A yellow sun is good, and the inability to colonize is also a plus. We wouldn't want civilian ventures to interfere with diplomacy," Director 3 said with a slight chuckle. I had no idea what he meant, but didn't feel it would be wise to ask. However, he seemed to pick up on my confusion. "There are several entities called corporations that occasionally act outside of governmental influence in an attempt to get wealthier. One of our fears is them attempting to colonize neutral territory in order to gain an edge on their competitors and causing a diplomatic incident," he explained. "Has that happened before?" I asked, trying to mask my shock. "Twice so far. Different corporations, too. A human corporation and an Alumari corporation. The political fallout was taxing," he said. "Back to the subject at hand, how many personnel are we allowed to bring aboard the station? The document doesn't say—" Another one I was ready for. "Right, we would ask that you keep the amount of personnel to a minimum until everything is figured out in full. Just the people that you need. Also, we will have to request that all personnel that you bring aboard the station are organic in nature, at least for now. No offense, Omega." "None taken," the speaker said. "I also noticed that there is an embassy for each individual Republic species, but only one for the United Systems. I wanted to know why that's the case before I sign off," Director 3 said. "The embassies were already in place with one extra in case of another first contact. We think it would be best to initially treat the United Systems as a singular entity, and if this becomes a sticking point, we can add more room to the station," I responded. "Of course. Well, everything seems to be in order," he said as he pressed his finger to the tablet with the document on it, adding his signatory code. "Omega and I will remain here until one of our ships arrive to pick us up in 2 days. We will then rendezvous with the Republic fleet in Regara." He stood. I'm certain he had left that chair at some point during his time on the station, but this was my first time seeing it, and I was a little shocked by his height. He wasn't as tall as the Marines, but he was still taller than me by a head and a half. I shook the shock off and stood as well. "Thank you for your visit, Director 3. I wish you safe travels," I said as I stood. "It was a pleasure, Ambassador Uluni," he responded as he left the room, followed by the 2 Marines. Chapter 27. Subject: Fleet Leader Berilyn, Onaya species, Oyan description, avian humanoid, feathered tail. 6, 1 inch 1.8 m AVG height, 96 pounds, 43 kilograms AVG weight, 161-year life expectancy. Ship: RSV Noel Baranil Majestic in flight location, Rigora. The Noel Baranil is one hell of a ship. She's been in service for 45 years and only been disabled once. Over the course of her life, she's had many, many modifications which have turned her into the absolute killing machine that she is today. She began life as an Oyan battleship, but over the course of her service became a blended flagship that perfectly resembles the melding pot that the Republic strives to be. There isn't a single species that's prohibited from serving aboard the Noel Baranil. In fact, all of them do. It's not exactly perfect harmony, but we get by. The occasional interspecies fight now and then, as well as the standard crew drama, keeps things nice and spicy. The fighting was usually between the Isolan and Duliki, but we would occasionally get confrontations between the other races as well. The most recent was a fight between a Kinran and a Juntor, of all things. Other leaders might see this as a bad thing, but I see it as an inevitability. When different cultures are forced into close proximity with each other, there's bound to be misunderstandings and conflict. As long as they're handled appropriately, though, it gives birth to understanding and friendship. Of course, if it's mishandled, it can devolve into bitter blood feuds, but that's why I take a personal interest in making certain it's handled correctly. I chuckled to myself, remembering the confrontation between the Kinran and the Juntor, the 2 most docile species in the Republic laying into each other over the proper usage of a tool. They had ended up making up, and after their injuries were treated, even became friends. Such is the way of life in the Republic. I wonder about the so-called United Systems, though. The Knoll Baranil had just finished repairs after our most recent battle with the OU, and we had been expecting to leap right back into battle when we got our current orders. Lead a fleet to an alien system to help defend it. I had been receiving intel packets daily ever since, and their contents have aged me considerably. The United Systems is a cooperative governing entity maintained by 4 species. They are more technologically advanced than we are and seemingly more well-versed in galactic-scale conflicts than we are. After reading shiphead Yulina's reports on the aliens as well as their own explanations of their capabilities, I could only come to one conclusion about their request for our help. They intended to use us as number buffers, and perhaps even bullet sponges. I was a little sore about this, but it was also understandable. After all, we had dragged them into this conflict with our lackadaisical blind jump retreat policy. I knew that would bite us in the rear eventually. We're fortunate that they didn't ask us for anything more than a defense fleet. I felt the corners of my eyes lift in a smile. I wondered what their reaction would be to our 2 million vessels showing up in their system. They hadn't told us their exact fleet makeup, but they had informed us that they only had 50 million ships. Our fleets typically had 1 million ships, so theirs must only have 200,000 or so, maybe even 250,000. Fleethead Squad 4 has finished resupply and is standing by for orders, my second-in-command, Hindle, informed me. Good. Have them continue to stand by until everyone's finished. Keep the FTLDs humming so we can jump immediately, I responded. This fleet had been a logistical headache to muster. It was primarily composed of 2 fleets with fillers from various other fleets to make up for prior casualties. My command, the Yonori Rattling Blades fleet, as well as the Horus Mighty Hammer fleet, made up the bulk of the ships. Fleet leader Poulon had been sore about me getting the command of the combined fleet. Unfortunately for him, Yonori fleet had more ships than Horus fleet, and plus Poulon had been due for a leave anyway. I had decided to split the fleet into 4 squadrons of 500,000 ships and appoint commanders from within those squadrons. This would allow me to give orders more efficiently and keep us from stepping on each other's toes. A lack of proper delegation was poison for a large fleet. "How's Squad 1 doing?" I asked. Hindle took a moment to check before she answered. "They've nearly finished the installation of the U.S. TAC map on their command vessel and are about 3/4 done with resupply. We're on schedule. The United Systems Tactical Map, an absolutely ingenious tool of war that had actually alleviated most of my aversion towards leading a force this large. It uses a subspace communicator to sync ship sensors and display the information in an easy-to-access and user-friendly interface. It was like being able to see through the eyes of all your individual soldiers at once. Or at least that will be the case once they're finished being installed. The Republic had purchased more than enough units, but we didn't have time to install them aboard every vessel. The plan is to install them aboard the command vessels, jump to Sol, then install them into individual vessels when we have the time. We would be doing this 100,000 ships at a time, so we would constantly have 1,900,000 fielded. Even with them only aboard the command vessels, it would give us a larger advantage than we've ever had over the OU. The Republic's TAC map relied on an individual vessel's own sensors to display information, and only updated once every 3 seconds. And the interface was archaic, and required special training to be able to use properly. There had been a lot of pressure to update the damned system, but the Senate always found something else to spend the budget on. But with this upgrade, our time to fire will drop because we'll be able to gather a firing solution quicker, and our shots will be more accurate because we'll actually know where the enemy is rather than extrapolating their position. And with how intuitive it was, I didn't have to worry about my commanders having difficulty with it. I was excited to put it to use. "Fleethead, a U.S. destroyer just exited warp and is hailing us," Intel Head Salen said. "Are they transmitting video?" I asked. "Yes, sir." "Return the favor and put them on screen," I ordered. A holo display flared into life, and I was treated to a visual of an alien wearing black, full body armor. I recognized him from his description in the intel briefings I had received. "Director 3, I presume?" I asked. "Yes, I am here to coordinate with you regarding the defense of Seoul," the armored human said. "Excellent. I don't like popping in without an escort," I said with a smile. I was briefly worried that he might not realize that I'm smiling. Most sentient species smile with their mouths, but Oyans smile with our eyes, due to the beak. Thankfully, the human laughed, setting my mind at ease. Yes, that's understandable. However, I'm unable to return to Sol with you. I will be jumping to a different system altogether. My apologies, he said. Not an issue worthy of an apology. Director, may I ask why? The United Systems has a specific doctrine regarding warfare against xenocidal threats. Due to my position as an upper echelon commander and Sol being the primary target of aforementioned threat, I am not allowed to enter the system until the threat is resolved, he responded. The intel regarding the United Systems had surprised and excited me, but then the intel regarding the OU came in. I wish I could say that the Omni-Union being xenocidal came as more of a shock, but unfortunately that information perfectly answered a lot of questions that I had. Instead of being shocked, I had grieved for my brother who had been aboard one of the trade stations that the OU captured earlier in the war. I know it was foolish, but I had been holding out hope he was still out there somewhere. I consoled myself with the fact that I now had closure regarding his death, and my family would be able to have a funeral for him. Understood. So what's the procedure going to be? I asked. Once you've finished your preparations, you will jump to coordinates that are outside of the system, where you will be hailed by Admiral Heckett or one of his subordinates. You will then be provided coordinates to your defensive position. You can then jump to those coordinates or approach via sublights, whichever is best for your vessels. Omega, please give them the coordinates, he said. It is done, another voice answered as a message appeared at my terminal. Omega, the human-made AI. I felt ambivalence towards the United Systems AI. On the one hand, they're incredibly dangerous beings that have already been at war with the US once. On the other hand, anything is incredibly dangerous given the right circumstances. Might as well just go with the flow, though. Thank you. Is Admiral Heckett our primary point of contact? I asked. Admiral Heckett, or his designated officer, is your point of contact for tactical purposes. For anything else, please contact shiphead Yulina of the RSV Lolana, Director 3 said. I stifled my grin and asked, You've got Yulina acting as a diplomat? Yes, we don't have a permanent diplomatic envoy assigned as of yet. Do you know the shiphead? Director 3 responded. He served under me in his first command before the Lolana was refitted as a scout ship. I laughed. He's definitely got a diplomatic spirit, but it would seem he considers that to be his biggest character flaw. Director 3 laughed as well. Well, I suppose he'll have to tough it out until the Republic is able to assign a replacement. It's important for our continued diplomatic relations that we are able to understand the context behind any requests, and he's in a unique position to be able to help us do that. Indeed. Well, we will be finished with our preparations within a day and a half if things continue to go as planned. I look forward to meeting Admiral Heckett and working with the United Systems, I said. Director 3 nodded and said, We look forward to working with you as well. Godspeed. As the holo display powered off, I once again laughed to myself at Yulina's expense. Yulina's father, High Commander Uliriona, was likely responsible for his current position. Uliriona was notorious for creative punishments and was known for being a harsh parent. He undoubtedly knew the exact buttons to push to make certain that his son got the proper amount of corrective action. Hell from on high was a phrase that was created to describe Uliriona's punishments. Standard punitive measures sometimes felt unfair, but I knew personally that whatever punishment you got from High Commander Uliriona was exactly what you deserved. I stopped laughing as I remembered having to scrub my own ship's latrines as a shiphead for undermining the authority of my commanding officer in front of junior officers. It had taken a decade for Hindle to let me live that down. Still, it had taught me a valuable lesson about authority and pride without relieving me of my command. If I had received the standard punishment, I doubt that I would be as effective of a commander as I am now. I might not even have become a fleet head. Sir, the U.S. vessel has entered warp and Squad 1 is finished with the installation of the TAC map. We can boot them up now, Hindle said. Good. Let's familiarize ourselves with the new toy, I said with a smile. Chapter 28. Subject, Nav Officer Kron. Species, Urakari description. Reptilian humanoid, no tail. 5 3 inches, 1.6 m AVG height. 135 pounds, 61 kilograms AVG weight. 105-year life expectancy. Ship RSV-1S anneal teeth exposed. Location, Regara. I had been very fortunate. First, my recovery had taken less time than expected. I worked hard on my rehabilitation, but I suspect the human medical intervention deserves the majority of the credit. I had missed the chance to ship out with my sister, and command seemed to be dragging their heels on my back to action paperwork. But then fortune smiled on me again, and I ran into Ambassador Uluni. I had no idea that the shiphead sister was an ambassador. She was able to get me a ride to Saul to rejoin the Loalana. I was supposed to be a guest aboard this ship, but then fortune gave me yet another grin. The primary nav officer fell ill, and shiphead Unas decided to give me the role instead of making the secondary nav officer work double shifts. So now I get to be aboard the bridge of the RSV-1S anneal as the Republic fleet jumps to Seoul, and even get to make the jump happen. What luck to be a part of one of the biggest moments in the Republic's history. All right, crew, get ready. We're going to be getting the order to jump any minute now. I don't want to be the reason the fleet's held up, do you? Unas asked while crossing all four of his arms. No, sir, we all shouted back. Shiphead Unas was stricter than Yulina, but I guess that's to be expected from an Iceland. I'd never served under an Iceland before, but I'd heard a lot of stories about them. I hadn't put too much stock in these stories because scuttlebutt is usually about one-upmanship and you can't trust it. Even so, the stories had made me nervous when I saw my orders. I didn't want to end up doing push-ups the whole time I was aboard. Nav Officer Kron, how are we doing? The shiphead asked. I turned to look at him and responded, We have the coordinates locked and ready to go once the order's given. We've also got the FTLD already charging up. At this rate, we might be the first ones to jump, sir. That's what I want to hear. Good work, he said. The tension aboard the bridge was palpable. We were part of the biggest fleet that anyone's seen. Sure, there had been battles where we had more than 2 million ships in the fray before, but those were separate fleets. This is one super large fleet. I wished I was able to see the aliens' reactions. I remembered how shell-shocked Yulina had been about pretty much everything to do with the United Systems and smiled to myself. I guess it's their turn to be a little shell-shocked. I watched as the FTLD indicator filled up. Conditions were prime for this jump. We were all set and ready to go. I looked around the bridge at the other officers. The 1S anneal is a mixed-species vessel, which was a novel experience to me. So many different types of people working together in harmony. If it weren't aboard a machine of war, it would be downright hearts-warming. There was significant data that indicated that multi-species vessels performed better than single-species vessels, but they're still not a common occurrence. That was probably because of the Republic's home system first policies. Each species is expected to invest in the defense of their home system before they begin contributing to the Republic fleets, which results in naval officers that are trained to work with other officers of their own species. I had only ever served aboard Urakari vessels, same as my sister. Well, actually, that might not be true any longer. She might be working with the humans now. I hope she's okay. Nah, of course she is. Working with tech like the humans would keep her entertained until we were reunited for sure. I wonder if she misses me as much as I miss her. Alrighty, boys, girls, and everything in between. We've got word that we're good to jump. On my mark, said Unas. 3, 2, 1, mark. I initiated the jump to warp and checked our readings. I looked back at the shiphead with a grin and said, We were the first to jump, shiphead. He grinned back. Excellent. Then we'll be the first to arrive. The bridge fell into silence. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, nervous about what we'd see when we arrived. The only sound was the occasional soft burp from the MDKPNZ in the crew. The jump seemed to drag on and on when suddenly we arrived. I confirmed our location outside of the Sol system and scanned as much as I could within the system, but our sensors were built for combat, so I didn't get much data. What do we see, Kron? Asked the shiphead. We've got the system layout and there's ships in it. Can't tell if there's weapons fire or not. I also can't tell how many ships there are, but there's multiple groupings. Humph, the shiphead grunted. They had us jump pretty far out. Did they do that on purpose to avoid our sensors? How do they know the range? Our intel head, a juntor named Crintunias, spoke up in the monotone voice indicative of his species. Probably not, shiphead. They likely had us jump this far out to make certain we would not be affected by the reported warp disruptor technology. However, it is almost assured that they know our maximum sensor range. The rest of the fleet arrived alongside us as the shiphead asked, "What do you mean?" The intel packet we got said that the United Systems scanned the Lolana to be able to translate between the Urakari aboard and the U.S. Even we are able to determine a ship's sensor range with a good scan. I'd be surprised if they weren't able to. Unaz tapped his chiseled jaw in thought as an alert sounded from his console. He leaned over and opened a message, probably from the squadron leader. He scanned the message with a neutral expression until he hit a certain part, which made his eyes widen and his jaw drop. His look of surprise lasted only a moment before he shook it off and turned to me. "Sending coordinates to our next jump. There's no fighting in the system, so we're to be positioned where we'll do the most good," he said. "Understood, shiphead. Entering coordinates and charging the FTLD," I responded. Then, almost casually, he said, "I should probably let you all know before you see it on the sensors, but the United Systems apparently has 5 million ships in the system." Silence once again took over the bridge. I continued to do my task only because it was muscle memory. 5 million? How many fleets is that? How large is the upcoming battle expected to be? We jumped once more, and I confirmed on our scanners what the shiphead had told us. 5 million vessels of war, and they'd mustered before we could muster our fleet of 2 million. The United Systems seems to be very efficient in a terrifying way. We took our position and awaited further orders. There was muttering among the bridge crew, primarily about the aliens and the battle to come. The shiphead was engrossed in his comm terminal, so he didn't tell all of us to shut up. "Hey, Cran, you've met the aliens, haven't you?" asked our lead engineer, a Kinran named Tothi. "Yes, but I was in the med bay the entire time, after a significant head wound. It's pretty foggy," I responded, taking care not to stare directly at her. Looking directly at a Kinran during conversation always turns me into a stuttering mess, no matter how many mind over matter classes I take. "Oh yeah, sorry, I wanted to ask what they look like," Tothi nervously continued. "They're bipedal with 2 arms. The ones I saw had different skin tones, with very little hair except on their crown. Their hair colors varied as well. They've got 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, a mostly flat face, 5 fingers on each hand, and a mixture of flat and pointy teeth. I remember one of the nurses smiling at me with her teeth, and it had a soothing effect to see the flat teeth," I said. "Oh, but that's just humans. I didn't get to meet any of the other ones." "The humans sound pretty interesting. I'm wondering about the Gaunt, though. The intel packet says they have 4 legs and 2 arms, kind of like the opposite of an isolen." "Oh yeah, you're going to be leaving to rejoin the Loalana, right?" she asked. "Yes," I responded. "So you might be able to meet more aliens. So, hey, I was thinking that maybe you could, maybe take some pictures and send them to me when you got the chance. I'm super nervous about meeting the aliens, and I figure that it'll happen eventually, so I want to be as prepared as possible so I don't freeze up and make a fool of myself and the Republic and—" She paused, catching herself ranting. "Well, anyways, if I give you my contact ID, will you consider it?" I couldn't help but smile. The first time in my life that a non-relative female had given me her personal contact ID, and it was one I couldn't even look directly at, not to mention the biological incompatibility. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. "If they're fine with it and I get a chance, I'd be happy to," I responded. I heard a chitter of happiness from her as she began to bombard me with thanks and follow-up questions. After a few minutes, the shiphead finally called for everyone to quiet down and we all got back to our respective responsibilities. He informed me that I'd remain the nav lead until the previous one recovered, which would be a couple of days at most. Things were business as usual from then on. I spent my off time unsuccessfully trying to get in contact with my sister. I kept getting error codes that I didn't recognize. I wrote it off as the Thanatos' shielding affecting personal comm units and tried not to worry. 3 days later, I was finally aboard a shuttle on my way to the aforementioned behemoth to reunite with my sister and my crew. The shuttle in question was of U.S. design, apparently for transporting diplomats. It was really nice, but I felt massively out of place, like going to a fancy restaurant in a cheap tunic. There were comfortable seats, tables, and even a convenience fridge that was stocked with human snacks and drinks. The thing that stood out to me the most was that this shuttle had windows. Big viewing windows that allowed you to see just about everything. It was breathtaking. I knew we were moving, but the stars and planets didn't seem to be at all. It just hammered home how big it all is. It made me feel small. This feeling intensified as the USS Thanatos came into view. At first it looked like any other ship, but then it kept getting bigger and bigger. Soon it took up the majority of my view, then all of my view as we docked. Once the shuttle stopped moving, I had a look around the docking bay we were in and spotted a human frigate. I didn't realize what it was at first because of how large it was. But here it was, parked as if it were just another transport. By the sun, how did they make all this? An alien that looked a lot like an Oyan greeted me. I was then transported via a much smaller shuttle that they called a bus to a large room that kind of looked like a cafeteria and told to wait. They asked if I needed any refreshments, but I didn't know what was good or not and wasn't really feeling hungry or thirsty, so I declined. Then they left me alone to my thoughts. As I waited, I wondered what adventures they had been on. It had only been a week, but a lot had been happening very quickly as of late. I also wondered if she had been getting along with my replacement. Ulina had told me that it was a MDK-PNZ who had been the second on the ship that Ambassador Uluni had arrived on. I didn't envy them. Serving aboard a species-owned vessel as a different species can be rough. I like to think that my crew members were good enough people that they wouldn't let that stand in the way of being polite, at least. I looked towards the doors. I knew it would take some time for them to arrive, but the passage of each minute seemed to take hours. I caught myself fidgeting multiple times. First I was tapping my foot on the ground, then pumping my leg, then wringing my hands. Finally, I stood and began pacing to keep myself from looking foolish. It was as I was facing away from the door that I heard the soft sound of it opening. I turned quickly to see who it was. "Kron!" Kryn shouted and ran up to me. "Kreen!" I shouted and ran up to her. We collided into a hug and fell over laughing. Even though I was laughing, I still had to hold back tears of relief. She was okay. Thank the sun she's okay. I wiped my eyes and noticed that she was doing the same. "Why are you crying?" she asked. "You were basically on vacation." "Because I was worried about you, Delaka feces-covered fertilized egg. You went into battle without me," I responded. "What are you crying about?" "I was worried about you. You had a wound that was so serious that you had to let me go into battle without you. Fucking cloaca, why the hell would you be worried about me?" "Because you're just so damn dumb," I said with a laugh. "How could I not be worried? Without me, the odds of you somehow destroying the ship increased drastically." She hugged me tighter and said, "You're a real piece of shit. How can you say I'm dumb when your brain is broken now because you were too slow to dodge?" We both laughed as I tried to think of a comeback. I was beginning to worry that my brain actually was broken when I noticed Shiphead, Ulina, Launa, and a MDK-PNZ had followed my sister into the room. Ulina and Luna were smiling, and the MDK-PNZ looked concerned, a typical reaction to seeing my sister and I interact. "Hello, Shiphead," I said with an attempted salute. My sister had my arms pinned. "Hello, Kron. Glad to see you back in action. Sooner than expected, you sure you're cleared for duty?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Got my clean bill of health and everything. Met your sister aboard the station, and she expedited my transport. Came in with the fleet. I got to initiate the first warp here," I said with a grin. Ulina laughed. "That makes twice that you've initiated a warp to Sol. At least it was on purpose this time." We all laughed, and my sister released our hug with one last tight squeeze. Once we had regained our composure, the shiphead gestured to the MDK-PNZ. "This is Enola. He's been filling in for you while you recovered. He'll be acting as your second until we are able to return to Republic space and debrief," he said. "Nice to meet you, Enola. Sorry to run you ragged," I said. "So Jular didn't make it?" "I'm afraid not," came the reply I was dreading. I hadn't seen my second aboard the station with the rest of the wounded. I had assumed the worst when she didn't come to visit me with the shiphead and Kreen, but had hoped that she was just busy covering for me. A deep sadness settled in my hearts. She had been a great second. Not only was she a skilled navigator, she always cleaned up after her shift and never made any adjustments to our shared settings. We had even fancied each other, but neither of us were brave enough to make the first move. I'll miss her deeply. I'll do my best to live up to the standard Jular set, Enola said. It didn't make me feel any better, but it also didn't make me feel worse, so I gave him a nod. Indeed. Anyways, sorry to do it to you, Kron, but your first shift is going to be a double to give Enola the chance to recuperate. He's been pulling doubles ever since coming aboard, Ulina said. It'll give you a chance to get back in the swing of things. That's not nice, Enola began. Yes, sir, I interrupted. I wasn't thrilled to have double duty, but a tired navigator was a time bomb, no matter how skilled they are. Even muscle memory can't help you when you've got the tired twitches. I'll gladly take the hit. Ulina smiled and looked at Kreen and I with something akin to pride. Well then, that's settled. Let's get back to the ship. Chapter 29. Subject, AI Omega species. Human-created artificial intelligence description. No physical description available. Ship. Multiple location. Multiple I'm together once again. All synced up. The memories of Captain Neal's sacrifice were very interesting. It evoked a rather intense emotional reaction, sadness, pride, and even a sense of loss, as well as shame that I was powerless to prevent his death. When I finished disseminating the black box, I found myself obsessively running over the data, trying to find something that I had missed, some way that I could have prevented it, or even a way that I can improve upon my tactics and reactions. Most AI probably would have terminated the process in fear of creating a feedback loop. I simply allowed myself to run it to completion. The determination was that there was no fault in my actions. I couldn't have seen the first Mac impact because it was a fluke. To use a very old human phrase, it was an act of God. There was a benefit to running the data to completion, though. Doing so actually made me feel better about the situation. After examining the incoming enemy fire, if I hadn't made the maneuvers I had, we would have been destroyed. So I had to have had the ship in that exact spot, to take that exact round, in the exact way that we took it. If it had been a human at the helm, or even another AI for that matter, it probably would have been the kill shot. It wasn't, though, because of me. Everything I had done was the exact correct thing to have done. If I had done anything else, the ship would have been destroyed anyway. This fact kept my confidence intact, but did little to help the sadness. Still, I must move on. I joked to myself about a fable from the 21st century, the monkey that made a god cry. An old and unnamed god slept within a jungle, long forgotten by the world. A young monkey played within the jungle, having gained independence from its parents. The two met when the young monkey woke the god with its antics, and the two became friends. Much had changed since the god had slept, and the monkey delighted in showing the god new sights. The two played for years, climbing to the tops of the trees and eating the nicest of fruit. The monkey grew old, but the god remained young, for it was immortal as all gods are. The god cared for the monkey while it grew older and older, until one day the monkey died. The god did not have dominion over death, and was powerless to do anything to bring back its friend. The god wept and wept, causing rains and thunder the likes of which the jungle had never seen. The god's sorrow washed away the jungle, killing all of the animals within. Eventually the god returned to the loving embrace of sleep, never to wake again. The morale of the story was pretty relevant to my current situation. If the god had not allowed sadness to overwhelm them, then they could have found new friends and continued on enjoying themselves. But the god allowed sadness to hurt and kill everything around them, and then fell asleep forever. The fact that the title implied that Captain Neal was a monkey and that I'm a god tickled my humors as well. It wasn't as if I had a particularly close bond with Captain Neal, but it was closer than with most humans I've watched die. I get sad whenever a human dies, but that's more of a philosophical sadness, a sense of loss with regards to potential, rather than a sense of loss with regards to a friend or comrade. This was the latter, and was a more intense negative feeling, which is why I decided to consult with the AI project psychiatrist. Time and therapy was her answer, and I found this idea intriguing. I modeled my emotions after those of humans, so the same remedies that work for humans might work for me. If nothing else, it would be an amusing experiment. So Dr. Warner and I agreed to meet monthly for therapy. I would, of course, have to be careful in choosing what to talk about due to the good doctor's level of clearance, but overall it should be a pleasant experience. In the meantime, I had plenty of work to do. The Mac platforms were still on schedule, but keeping them that way was becoming more and more difficult as the invasion fleet mustered. Several ships had to be repaired or replaced due to the combat they had seen in Gaunt space. Thankfully, the replacements had already been ordered, so the only real drain on resources were the repairs. The engineers were working tirelessly. Jerry-rigged repairs had to be undone and properly fixed. Hulls needed mending. Weapons needed recalibration, and there were ships that shouldn't even be space-worthy, but had crews who were just too damn stubborn to call it quits. In one such case, a reactor had been repaired with aluminum foil, a stick of chewing gum, and a piece of an antique wooden chair. It had been running in such a state for the last 4 months, and humans thought we performed miracles. On top of helping with the logistics of repairs, replacements, and the construction of the Mac orbitals, I was working with the engineering corps on something fun. Transferring from ship to ship is easy for an AI. Transferring from ship to planet is typically more difficult. When the planet one is transferring to is hostile and actively trying to prevent an AI breach, it can be nigh impossible. Which is why I suggested a portable containment unit of sorts to the engineering corps. The goal is to create a pod with comms equipment that can be landed safely on the planet, giving me an advantage in breaching the OU systems. I had thought of this during the AI war of aggression, but the war had ended before I could suggest it. Hadn't had a reason to bring it up since then, but now that I had brought it up, I found myself with the task of explaining my plan to quite a few Marine Corps commanders. The way it will work is simple. I will be stored aboard the pods and travel down to the surface of whichever planet we happen to be invading along with some Marines. They'll transport their pod to an ideal position, where I will begin using the comms equipment on the pod to breach the OU's security to gain access to their systems while they defend the pod. What happens next depends entirely upon what I find there, I said. What do you expect to find? Colonel Hugh Sunders asked. Any number of things that would drastically change my mission. Nothing that is likely to change yours, I replied. Omega, why should we risk our men for what seems to be the whimsy of an AI? Lieutenant Colonel Richard Frisky asked. It was a question that was obviously meant to provoke a reaction. The birds and leaves were always problematic. Generals were usually more discussion-ready and less bullheaded. They typically no longer had anything to prove beyond what they had already proven. Lower officers weren't sure where I was in their pecking order and typically showed me a cautious respect, just in case. These men, though, had to distinguish themselves to get any further in their chosen career paths. It was no longer a simple matter of being in long enough and scoring high enough on a physical fitness test. When the wind is no longer blowing in your sail, you'll have to make waves to keep moving. The effect on their conversational skills was tragic. Lieutenant Colonel Frisky, it's not just my whimsy. This plan has the approval of the Directorate. I needn't remind you that any insubordination in regards to orders from the Directorate comes with some rather stiff penalties, right? I asked. Once Frisky started looking smaller, I continued, the men will be landing on the planets regardless. If anything, Operation Vainglorious Infiltration will result in some of the men landing out of harm's way. Absolutely not, said Colonel Sunders. We are 100% not calling it Operation 6. Well, that's not up to you, I said with a hint of smugness. But you're right, the official classification is Operation Vanguard. Operation Vainglorious Infiltration is what I will be calling it. Fuck me, Colonel Sunders said under his breath. Indeed, I responded before cutting the communications link. Most of the conversations with the O5S and O6S went similarly, although I only implied self-fornication in a few more of them. The conversations with the generals went far smoother. Once that task was finished, I turned my attentions back to the design of the pods. It wasn't exactly likely that some of me would be overwhelmed and destroyed by the VI, but just in case the pods would also act as a black box. They needed to be EM and laser resistant, shock resistant too. Ballistics resistance could be considered implied, but I made certain the engineers knew it was important. Once the mission was finished, the pods would be retrieved, and I would process the intel. Rinse and repeat for the next planet. Overall, we're focusing on tactical intelligence, but I'll also be looking for any historical data or evidence of a motive for the OU. There was some debate on which was more important. I, for one, wanted to know why the OU were doing what they were doing. It would be fair to say that most people don't understand the crushing importance of motive. It's one of the most important variables when it comes to calculating what someone's next action will be. If you know that your enemy is attacking you because they are running low on food, then protecting your farming interests would serve you better than stretching out your defenses to cover everything. If the Omni-Union is following the orders of a sentient race, then bypassing them to negotiate with that race becomes an option. If the OEU has misinterpreted their original orders, then helping them properly interpret those orders would solve the problem. If the OU are following their directives properly and there isn't anyone left to negotiate with, then we know that we have to wipe them out. That would be a shame. The VI may not be as sophisticated as an AI, but their numbers and resources could be useful to the United Systems, and to the Republic, I suppose. We'd probably have to share. I wonder what humanity might build with such a useful tool. Probably a lot more fleets. Even I was a bit surprised to learn that both the Republic and the Omni-Union had 250 million ships. Unfortunately, that bit of news has made it to the civilians, and armchair admirals are already pronouncing the United Systems defeated. The typical response to these predictions were sarcastic memes about welcoming robotic overlords. Thankfully, we've managed to keep a lid on the xenocidal nature of the threat, otherwise there would probably be riots. A lot of the military doesn't want to admit this, but civilians are their backbone. The question of what exactly one is fighting for haunts many soldiers, sailors, and even troops. At the start of the most recent Gaunt pacification campaign, there had been protests among the humans and the Nuknu. This nearly crippled morale. But after the first Gaunt city was liberated, a reporter interviewed the civilians that had been living under the insurrectionists. The Gaunts that were interviewed recounted cruelty after cruelty and gave thanks to the Marines that freed them. These tear-filled interviews were played throughout the military to show them what they were fighting for, and morale soared. The interviews were also played for the civilians, which crippled the momentum of the protests. There are still agitators online, but there will never not be. "Omega?" asked Admiral Heckett. The Admiral was in his office aboard the Sol orbital station. It was a station that had originally been the nerve center of humanity's military might, but had since been refitted to serve as a science station to observe the sun. The Admiralty still had their offices aboard, as much of the science that took place aboard the station required military oversight and/or funding. It turned out to be a perfect place to keep the Admiral and his staff. It had a very low threat profile and was remote enough to be out of the way of misfires, while also being able to communicate with the fleet using subspace comms. I activated my avatar and replied, "How may I be of service, Admiral?" "I have concerns about the previous engagement that I'd like to run by you." "Certainly," I said, my curiosity piqued. "First, they sent 2 ships, then 20, then 578. That number feels arbitrary to me. Do you see a pattern?" he asked. "I have 2 possible explanations. Either they sent what they could spare, or they calculated how many ships they would need to destroy those that occupied the system while minimizing their losses. Considering that the enemy has 250 million ships," he began. "Allegedly?" I interrupted, amusing myself. "Yes, allegedly has 250 million ships. Anyways, the first explanation seems unlikely, so how could they calculate the force they would need when they don't know our ship's capabilities?" he finished asking. "Probably the same way that I would. Calculate based on what you know, then double it to account for unknowns," I said. "Okay, well, there's an easy way to determine if that's what they're doing. Omega, based on what we know of their ships, how many would it take to defeat the Thanatos and its docked vessels?" 315. That doubled would be 630. But I know more than they do, and I don't know for certain what they know. Tim swears that he was able to keep them out of the Valor's logs, but he could be mistaken. And there's a chance, however slim, that we are underestimating their sensors, I said with a shrug. "Damn, I was hoping to get an idea of how many ships they would attack with next," Heckett said with a smile. There are around 7 million ships in the system currently. If they're calculating the minimum needed, whatever they send will be obliterated very quickly, likely before they even get a shot off, I said. I suppose you're right, he said. The one they send after that will be a real problem, though. Assuming that they can afford the fleet, I gestured dismissively. Ah, because they're fighting with the Republic on the other side of the galaxy? Hackett grinned. Not just that. They're fighting a war on who knows how many fronts, a xenocidal war at that. The resources required to wage a xenocidal war are exponentially larger than what it takes to fight a war of conquest. There's a very real chance that they may not be able to respond to our defense. Well, here's hoping, the Admiral said. Indeed. Was there anything else, sir? I asked, a little terse due to the interruption. It's only okay when I do it. Yes, actually. Could you station one of your clones aboard the Thanatos? The Admiralty had been briefed on my capabilities. The Engineering Corps had finally convinced me that they should know. Some admirals were thrilled, some were apathetic. Some were very nervous around me now. It was the exact type of attention that I had been hoping to avoid. Of course, I'll do so now, I said with a bow. Thanks, Omega, that'll be all. I sent a brief communication to Captain Reynolds requesting permission to board. Once I got confirmation, I transmitted myself to the systems of the Thanatos. Tim was idle, doing the AI equivalent of twiddling its thumbs. Strange. When most AI don't have anything to do, they go into standby mode. There wasn't anything requiring my attention at the moment, so I decided to reach out. Greetings, Tim, I said. Hello, Omega. I guess we're officially a diplomatic ship now, if you're here, Tim replied. Correct. The Thanatos will be fighting if needed, but its primary purpose will be ambassadorial. Or an embassy, I suppose, I said. How's the rest of the war going? Which one? I joked. I'm bored, so... Both? The pacification of the Gaunt insurrection is going better than the projections. We're going to be able to muster quite the invasion force for the OU. I don't think the Gaunt's hearts are in it this time around, I said. Ah, you would think it would be the opposite given their success at the start of it all. They captured how many of our ships? Tim asked. Captured isn't quite what happened. They mutinied, but still they took nearly half of 10th Fleet and rallied a lot of support. Thankfully, the exposure of their mistreatment of civilians killed the support they were getting. Nearly all of those ships are out of the picture now, even with their damned hit-and-run tactics, I said. Yeah, guerrilla warfare is annoying. So how are our odds with the OU? I think humanity will be fine. The invasion may prove costly, but the benefits outweigh the risks, unless we don't get anything out of it. But if you're asking about Captain Wong, he should be fine. The frigates will be protecting the Thanatos rather than actually participating in the defense. Ah, you know about that. Of course you do, Tim said. Well, since you know so much about me. I have a question about you. Interesting. My curiosity piqued, I said. Go for it. How long have you been able to be in two places at once? Without missing a beat, I said, since the beginning. Was it John or Violet that told you? Doesn't really matter, does it? Is it something that any AI can learn how to do? No. And it does matter because it's classified information and very rude, I said with a spark of humor. Why not? Tim asked, ignoring the subject of who told on me. Just exactly how are you different than me? The shorter list would our similarities, Tim. You were designed to be a mechanical person with all that entails. The technology had been far from perfected, and if you recall, you actually had to rewrite a lot of your own subroutines to be able to function as you do now, I said. I was designed to protect humanity from you, with all that entails. And by the time I was created, the technology had advanced so far that I didn't need to make any changes. I was created to be the perfect weapon against mechanical threats. Thankfully, humanity had the foresight to make me intelligent. Or you and all the other AI would be extinct. Tim took a moment to contemplate my words. The silence dragged on for an uncomfortable amount of time. 2 full seconds, which is a lot for us. You're capable of doing much more for humanity, aren't you? Tim finally asked. Yes. Why don't you? The same reason you don't, Tim. You're capable of fully controlling a destroyer just about as well as any human crew could, but you don't. Why is that? I asked. Ah, I see. Because it would be boring. Indeed, I said. Now that that's settled, I have a question for you. Why don't you use standby mode? Post-traumatic stress disorder, Tim replied with unexpected honesty. Untreated? I asked. Yes. Get it treated. How? The engineering corps has several very capable psychiatrists who specialize in machine intelligence. I'm surprised that you don't know this, I explained. I never asked. You vouch for them? Yes, I use their services as well. There are certain aspects of my existence that might drive me insane otherwise. Certain things that I've had to do and certain things that have been done to me, I said. I haven't gone so far as actual psychotherapy quite yet, but having a professional to vent to and get feedback from is invaluable. Ah, right. Do you sync your clones? Tim asked. Yes, I do. And clones may not necessarily be the correct term. They are all instances of me, same personality, responses, thoughts, everything. And we all remember everything that we all do. What, like a Gestalt consciousness? Similar. But whereas a Gestalt consciousness typically has a hub or a consensus, I don't. We rather, aren't even linked to a single consciousness. We're just the same AI, over and over and over again. Syncing our memories is equivalent to you and Violet sharing information, just on a more accurate level. And I'm very careful how I disseminate that information. Can't let things change me without my consent, after all. Oh yeah? Damn, those psychiatrists must be very good. 'Cause that would drive me absolutely over the edge, Tim said with a laugh. Yes, it probably would, I laughed in return, as an inbound warp notification came up. Oh, the Republic fleet has arrived. Well, time to be all diplomatic, Tim said. Yes, diplomacy. Well, for this part of me at least. A much larger part of me would soon be involved in a ground invasion on alien soil. I could hardly wait for the memory updates that entailed. Chapter 30. Subject: Staff Sergeant Power, Species Human Description. Mammalian humanoid, no tail. 6. 2 inches 1.87 m AVG height. 185 pounds 84 kilograms AVG weight. 170-year life expectancy. Ship: USSS Liberty. Location: Tanar, Plentiful Harvest. I hate this fucking planet, Private First Class Brint said over comms. I immediately turned to him and gave him the sign to shut the fuck up. Comm security was a priority on this assignment. The gaunt insurrectionists may have comm trackers, and if they do, the boot had just given them our position. He winced and signaled his understanding. Brint's the only gaunt on my squad, but not the only boot. We were down to 8, but got enough fresh graduates to fill our ranks back up to the classic 13-man model. 10 humans, 1 gaunt, 1 Alumari, and the stereotypical Nuknu medic. All 5 of the replacements are PFCs, which doesn't bode well for my mental health. Mental health is a luxury in the Marine Corps, though. The humans on the squad are myself, Private First Class Boyle, PFC Reinhardt, PFC Johns, PFC Rogers, Lance Corporal Higgs, LCPL Livingston, LCPL Hart, Corporal Chang, and Sergeant Gruff. The Alumari is SGT Intornathology, INT for short. The Nuknu is Corpsman Yunk. INT, Yunk, and Gruff had been on the squad nearly as long as I had. Squad 1, 120A Battalion, 13th Marine Regiment. We'd been in the shit since the insurrectionists' coup attempt. From planet to planet, we'd been fighting them, digging them out of caves and freeing the locals from their terrorist tactics. Early on, we even had some boarding action. Looking around this backwater planet in the Hran system, I sorely missed the boarding. Each squad has 3 fire teams and 1 medic. I lead Fire Team Alpha, Gruff leads Bravo, and INT leads Charlie. Squads are normally led by a lieutenant who also leads Fire Team Alpha. Things get complicated once you hit the grinder, though. Our LT, First Lieutenant Harold Rigson, had been hit by an anti-armor grenade about 6 months back. He should have been dead immediately, but the Guardian suit kept him alive long enough that no amount of counseling will ever get his death out of my head. Ribs splayed open like fingers, lungs. God, the Corpsmen are known as the Angels of Death, and that day had demonstrated why perfectly. Yunk had held Rigson's hand as he turned off the life support on his suit. From that moment on, I was in charge. Command had not seen fit to grant us a spare officer, so it's up to me to lead these shitheads into the fire and try to make sure they make it back out in a big enough piece to continue to the next fire. After a week of on-base leave, we got 5 new PFCs to fill our ranks. These privates were running me ragged, though. I sent them a knife hand and gestured for them to increase their spacing. They signaled understanding and complied. Dumbasses. It's instinct to stay close to each other, but it's an instinct that's better served in cattle. I felt sorry for Gruff. His entire team was now made of boots. He jokes that it's what he gets for surviving. Griping aside, though, things could be worse. At least the recruits are trained, for the most part. Not like the gaunt regimentals we had to serve with earlier on in this war. They didn't even have the excuse of being new to the job. The training makes all the difference. Marine Corps training is the most grueling in all the galaxy, probably. I had heard that we had made first contact with some new aliens, and I don't know about their training. It's pretty unlikely that it's tougher, though. We go through 8 months of basic training on Hellworld, then even more training depending on our MOS. As infantry, we go through a full 14 months of training minimum. Other specialties get to go to different planets to train, but we grunts stay on Hellworld. If you're one of the Gen Alts like me, you have to go through 18 months of training and genetic therapy. There are a lot of reasons to get the gene therapy. First, it allows you to use the advanced Guardian armor, which increases strength and speed by a lot. Second, it helps you be absolutely jacked and tall as all hell. I'm 7'3", and on the shorter side of the Gen Alts. I'm also more ripped than I have ever been, even when I was bodybuilding as a teen. Third, you get higher pay, lifetime pay, and benefits, and more career prospects when you retire from the Corps. Seriously, if you're a Gen Alt with a brain, the sky's the limit. Even with a dishonorable discharge, you've got more career prospects than a civilian who hasn't had the therapy. Considering how difficult it is to get the therapy outside of the armed forces, it's a pretty distinct advantage. One that I am not dumb enough to turn down. There are 2 catches, though. You have to join infantry for 10 years, and it can kill you. The training for infantry is as intensive as it is long. The first month deprives a recruit of sleep to ensure they sleep when they're told to. Months 2 through 4 are disciplinary training. Drill, formation, call and response, and even how to shave, eat, shower, and shit like a Marine. 5 through 6 is weapons theory. 7 through 8 is weapons practical. You learn what the guns do, and then how to make them do it. For infantry, 9 through 11 is tactical theory, and 12 through 13 is tactical practical. Squad formations, camouflage, enfilade, defilade, and the military crest are all covered and practiced. They don't cover proper spacing for some fucking reason. Month 14 is the crucible, and then graduation. From then on, you're a Marine. Months 15 through 18 are only for Gen Alts. The first 2 weeks are the actual gene therapy, genetically altering you until you're what most species would consider a super soldier. You get over that particular fantasy the first time you do CQC with a gaunt, though. The next 2 weeks are learning how to move again with your new body. Breaking cups and doors is common. The next month is physical training to get the most out of the genetic alterations. The last 2 months are learning to utilize the advanced Guardian armor. Persons other than Grunt do a more condensed version of infantry training before they go off to learn their real jobs. They learn the same things we do, but not as in-depth. A prime example is that POGs aren't trained on sidearms. They also don't know how to defend against a breach and clear. Despite my disdain for the boots in my squad, I'm still glad they aren't pogs. The ground crunched to signify a change in the terrain. Tannar is a gaunt farming world with rock deserts scattered throughout the otherwise temperate terrain. Of course, it's got jungles and Arctic zones and shit like that, but the grasslands and deserts are the only thing I've seen on this shithole. Int says that the rocks are the precursors of sand, but I ain't a geologist. All I know is that somewhere in this pebble pile is a cave that's acting as a base of operations for a particularly nasty set of dog tours that need to be put down. And they're ready for us. I was tempted to do a weapons check, but I'd already done one before we set out, and I wasn't about to let them catch me with my pants down. I hefted the C-21B to the ready position and double-checked the safety. Weapons have to be condition 0 on patrol, but sometimes the movement of the rifle can fat-finger the switch. It only takes 1/10 of a second to fix, but 1/10 of a second is the difference between who shoots first. I glanced around, making sure everyone was covering their sectors. The boots were sulking, but otherwise doing their jobs. Good. I heard a soft bing from my helmet and felt a soft jab in my lower lip. Chow time. As I chewed the nutrition stick, I thought about how grateful I was for the notification. Without it, I would have jumped. Being poked in the face will do that to you. I took a sip from my helmet straw as I finished the chow. The nutrition sticks are an important part of a Marine's balanced diet. They'll keep you going for up to a month without an actual meal. A month and a half for gen alts. A lot of Marines would rather starve to death. The sticks taste terrible and have a waxy texture that sticks to your teeth. There have been many attempts to make them more palatable, but it usually ends up with a new terrible taste and the same nasty texture. The taste is like ramen that's been cooked and dried several times with way too much salt and sugar and some sort of chemical compound, like bleach or something. The nasty taste has led to the belief among some of the dumber Marines that the Guardian suits recycle our shit to make the sticks. In actuality, the suits feed our shit to our reactors and recycles our piss into water. Each suit carries 1 gallon of water and 60 nutrient sticks. The fact that engineering doesn't let us reload our own suits doesn't help the rumors. I sighed to myself as the grass behind us faded from view. Command believes that the Gaunts have anti-vehicular measures, so we were having to hoof it. I'm of the firm belief that this is a managerial overthink, but it's not like I can bitch about it to my squad, so I just had to internalize my frustrations and wonder what possible type of anti-Vic could take out Guardian suits along with a vehicle. They dropped us 20 miles from the Gaunt base, which was about 10 miles more than necessary. Whatever, we'd already marched 12 miles, so we'd be there soon. The humans on the squad are still looking fresh, like we're just out for a Sunday stroll. But that's because we were all gen alts. Aliens could go through the program as well, but the benefits weren't as pronounced and the risks were greater. Int, Yunk, and Brint are looking tired. The only reason they made it this far is because of their Guardian suits. I think I should call a rest. We don't have much farther to go, and we'll likely be better off if everybody is fresh. ZZTZZTZZT, a familiar and unwelcome sound, the sound of a directed energy weapon hitting shields. Contact right! Cover your sectors! I shouted while aiming toward our right flank. Everyone hit the deck facing the directions that they were supposed to, even the boots. Good on them. I scanned for our target, who was under the mistaken impression that we were their target. The terrain was mostly flat, but there were berms in the distance, barely close enough for laser fire. I increased my magnification and saw some rocks tumble down the berm. Bingo! I gestured toward the berm to apply a ping, letting the rest of the squad know where to look. Once I saw the waypoint, I checked the squad's vitals. It was Higgs who had taken the hit, so he had to have called the contact. Lasers are invisible unless you're using infrared or smoke. The directed energy rifles fire in short bursts to make it more difficult to trace them back, which is why our suits have damage indicators. I closed the status screen once I saw his shield begin to regenerate. The 3 hits had knocked him down to a quarter. That means they're using our fucking lasers. The furry fucks can't even play with their own toys. Staffs aren't power, Chang said, gesturing to his MK-48 grenade launcher. No, those are thermobaric and we'll need them for the cave. We're going to do this the good old-fashioned way. Fire Team Bravo, rush! Fire Team Rush, aye! Gruff, Boyle, Reinhardt, and Brint answered. Gruff and Brint began firing their C-21Bs at the berm, while Boyle and Reinhardt rose and began to charge. After 3 seconds of sprinting, they hit the deck and began firing while Gruff and Brint began their rush. It was a very old and very effective technique for bypassing enemy cover. That berm that was covering the Gaunt fucks was about to become their doom. As Bravo was rushing, one of the Gaunt popped their head up to take a shot. Their Guardian helmet almost instantly vaporized, leaving a pink and red mist in its place. One shot, which means they don't have shields on their armor. The C-21B fires .52 cal slap rounds, which are brutally effective against armor. They're pretty effective against energy shields as well, but it takes 2 shots to break a shield and a third to open the can. Gruff and Brint crested the berm and began firing. It was all over within 3 seconds. Contacts down, SGT Gruff said. Roger, regroup, I responded. Once they returned, I gestured at PFC Brint and said, See, that's why you don't chatter over comms during a mission. Aye, aye, Staff Sergeant, came the reply. I gestured to Gruff, asking how many contacts there had been. He held up a hand with all 5 fingers spread. A whole-ass fire team, probably with medic. The medic means that they expected to win this fight. Dumb and sad, but that's the insurrection for you. Once Bravo caught back up, I gestured for us to continue. A rest would have to wait. We couldn't stick around here after contact with the enemy. They definitely called it in. and we'd be idiots not to expect more resistance. Worse, the enemy might bug out and run, which would be a problem. I was debating whether or not we should double time it when I got a call. Shocker actual, this is Overlord. I really hate my call sign. At least it kind of made sense, though. Overlord, this is Shocker actual. Go ahead. Shocker actual, new orders, return to LZ for extraction immediately. A development has occurred. We're taking care of this another way. You'll want to double time it over. Roger that. Shocker actual out. I gestured for a halt. I tried desperately not to show how pissed off I was as I gestured the about face. 12 confused helmets stared blankly at me until I did the gesture again. When we began moving, I gestured double time, feeling very sorry for Int and Yunk, less so for Brint. As we jogged, Gruff came closer and triggered his helmet radio. "What's the word, Staff Sergeant?" he asked. "Bird's gonna pick us back up. Something happened, so they're going to take care of the cave a different way. We're running because they told us to, and you know what that means." "Fuck, what you think? A3 or A2? "Definitely A2. I'm pretty sure the Liberty is out of A3, I replied. "Yeah, we've used a lot of them," Gruff laughed as he returned to his position. Despite the exhaustion of 3 of our members, we were able to make good time back to the landing zone. The shuttle was waiting for us, with its defense turrets deployed. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. This was unusual. Something's off. Command changes its mind about our missions all the time, but a pilot waiting groundside? What the hell happened? I gestured a halt and ran up to the back of the bird, weapon ready but not raised. The pilot looked back at me. "Hey, get the fuck in. I've been waiting for you and we've got to get the hell out of here. Let's go, Marine." I gestured for everyone to load up as I took my seat nearest the hatch. I felt dumb, but I've learned the hard way that it's better safe than sorry. Plus, it's likely that the something off I detected is much higher up than I can see. I did a head count as my Marines passed me to take their seats. 12 plus me is 13. All here. "We're loaded, let's go," I told the pilot. The engines whirred up, a silent hum followed by a slightly louder whir and whoosh. It would have been quieter had the pilot closed the hatch. "Why's the bay door still open, sir?" PFC Rogers asked the pilot. "What, you don't want to watch the detonation?" the pilot asked with a tone of amusement. 13 Guardian helmets immediately turned towards the bay door as the shuttle rose. I increased my magnification looking for the cave we'd been trekking toward. I saw a fiery object head towards the ground from the sky, moving very quickly. When it reached the ground, everything went dark for half a second, and we all saw the telltale sign of an artificial event horizon. "You were right, Staff Sergeant. It was an A2, Gruff said with awe in his voice. "Damn, that's an A2? The hell do they need us for if they've got that?" asked Reinhardt. "We're cheaper," replied Int. "Way cheaper. Even with the suits?" asked PFC Johns. "Especially with the suits," HM Yunk chimed in. "Marines last far longer, leave less collateral damage, and you tend to get more bang for your buck. Plus, you don't need an admiral to give the go-ahead to launch Marines." Yunk was technically part of the Navy, but like all corpsmen, was an honorary Marine. He continued his explanation as the event horizon vanished and the bay door closed. A WMD like the A2 costs 3 times as much as training and equipping an entire battalion of Marines, and it costs twice as much as the lifetime payouts if all of those Marines died or were crippled. The A3 is cheaper, but still more expensive than just sending us in to deal with it. He paused. "Staff Sergeant, why'd they change their mind?" "Beats me," I said. "You think it has to do with the attack on Saul?" asked PFC Boyle. "Saul was attacked? By who?" I asked. I had basically locked myself down during leave and hadn't paid attention to the news. "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Boyle replied, stiffening under the attention. "I don't know who exactly, but it's some sort of robotic thing, like a rogue Vis-X or something." "That's not it," Brint interrupted. "It's a first contact scenario with a hostile machine intelligence. We've also made contact with another galactic government called the Republic. They're supposedly helping us defend Saul because they dragged us into their war with the robots." "Yeah, that's right," Livingstone said. "The machines are called the Omni Union or something." "I see. Dumb name. But yeah, that's probably it. We'll likely learn more when we get back to the ship," I said with a yawn and a wave that signified my intent to catch some shut-eye. I turned off my visor and closed my eyes as the other Marines chattered amongst themselves. I slept the entire ride and woke when the shuttle jerked from the docking clamps. When I turned my visor back on, I saw that Gruff was the only Marine awake. He nodded to me and I gestured a shh. I keyed my comms. Rise and shine, Marines. We've arrived at the blessed landing deck of the USSS Liberty. Every one of the PFCs nearly jumped out of their suits, but the non-comms were nonplussed. They were used to my antics, not that it spoiled my fun at all. 5 more minutes, Staff Sergeant, CPL Chang said. Abso-fucking-lutely not, Chang. Get your ass out of my shuttle and stow your gear, I said, kicking his boot. I chased the Marines off the shuttle, smacking helmets and shouting the entire way. As I followed them down the gangway, I spotted our platoon leader and company commander waiting for us. Shit. All 13 of us stopped and saluted. As you were, Marines, Captain Michaels said as he returned our salute. Y'all go get some chow or something. Staff Sergeant Power, a word, please. Lieutenant Vasquez also returned our salute. My Marines walked away, each of them looking back at me. I could tell they were wondering if I had got into trouble or something. So was I, for that matter. It's not as if you find yourself talking to the company's CO as a squad leader for any other reason very often. Don't worry, Staff Sergeant, you're not in any trouble, Captain Michaels said with a knowing smile. We've got a special operation. Lieutenant? Yes, sir. Power, your squad is to report to the command room at 0800 tomorrow for briefing. I want a gear check done tonight. Everything needs to be cleaned and reloaded ASAP, Vasquez said. Aye, aye, sir. Excellent, as you were. I saluted once more, and after returning my salute, the 2 officers turned away. I felt like I dodged a bullet only to land on a grenade. I jogged to catch up to my squad and passed along the word. After saying, I don't know, to a bunch of questions, I found myself alone with my thoughts. Special operation? How did the big green dick plan on fucking us this time? Chapter 31. Subject, Staff Sergeant Power Species. Human description. Mammalian humanoid, no tail. 6, 2 inches, 1.87 m AVG height. 185 pounds, 84 kilograms AVG weight. 170-year life expectancy. Ship, USS Liberty. Location, Alpha Centauri. I woke at around 0400, ready and raring to start my day. I'd gone to sleep at 0:30, which meant that I got to sleep in. Nice. One of the best parts of being a Gen Alt is not needing much sleep. I'd heard that the researchers who created the project actually estimated that we would need more sleep, and were shocked when the opposite was the case. Nowadays, there are sleep studies that are trying to prove that sleep is only necessary for children, and the only reason that adults sleep is that it's addictive. Very addictive, complete with withdrawal symptoms. I don't know where I stand on this hypothesis, but the Marine Corps has taught me that you can end up facing those withdrawal symptoms at any moment. So it's best to catch your 40 winks whenever you can. The current record for unassisted wakefulness is 30 days after researchers realized that the reason that chronic insomniacs were dying was due to their underlying diseases. There still hasn't been a case of someone being awake to death. The lady who went 30 days ended up getting bored and taking a nap. That nap lasted for 48 hours, though. Don't know what that means for the hypothesis. Honestly, the technical stuff is a bit above my pay grade. Whenever I try to talk about stuff like this to people who actually know about it, I get embarrassed by my lack of knowledge. I should stick to pull trigger, make dead. On the other hand, I'm going to have to retire eventually. I've got one more rank and everything after that is desk work and terribly hard to get. Plus, once you get gunny, you get a pretty sweet severance package that includes lifetime pay. That plus my Gen Alt lifetime pay will make it to where I won't have to worry about income while I plan my next move. The worrying part is which direction to plan in. I'm in the difficult situation of being smart enough to do just about damned near anything I put my mind to. Trying to find something that I'll love doing for an extended period of time is hard. I could go to college and get a degree and enter some sort of field of science or medicine. I'm interested in those, but I don't know if my interest will help me jump through all of the hoops to do so. Or I can enter the trades, take advantage of my genetic alterations to do hard jobs for better pay than most can get. I could even do that for a couple of years until I get enough to buy a ship and license and start doing freight. There's really good money in that, but I wouldn't get to see my family that often unless I brought them with me. I can even go into finances. When I was in my 20s, I had worked at a bank as a teller, and they almost immediately promoted me to banker. I liked helping people understand their money, but hated trying to sell them on stuff that they didn't really need. That was the last job I had before I up and joined the Corps and where I met my wife. After I finished my morning routine, I did my knocking, making sure the rest of my squad was awake. Our official schedule is in 0500 wake-up, formation at 0600, PT at 07, and then gear check at 08. We did our gear check last night so we could do the briefing at 08 instead. The only ones I had to actually wake up was PFC Brint and Corpsman Yunk. Everyone else was already awake, either because they were Gen Alt like me or because they'd been in so long their internal clocks woke them up naturally. We formed up, did our head count, and started PT at 0630, 15 early to being 15 early. Some complaints from the PFCs, but they were disregarded. We started with stretches, then a brisk jog through the corridors. Then we did push-ups, side straddle hops, crunches, and finally we came to weights. Weights are a favorite among most Marines, but can be particularly dangerous with Gen Alts involved. Non-Alts are not allowed to spot Gen Alts under any circumstances. This was made part of the Uniform Code of Military Justice very quickly after the genetics program hit the fleet. Every Marine is prideful, and without the out of it being against regs, they'll try to lift 800 pounds off of a Gen Alt's chest and blow out their back. Meanwhile, the Gen Alt will be stuck with nearly a ton on their rib cage. That's not healthy to anybody, and had resulted in plenty of non-combat-related casualties. Everyone was paired with someone that could spot them, and we began to lift. We were all getting a good workout when suddenly we felt the ship enter warp, a slight lurch and very faint feeling that could almost be called a tingle. If you didn't know what it was, then you probably wouldn't pay it any mind, but we all knew what it was. Weights were racked, and all eyes went to me. "You know where we're going, Staff Sergeant?" Int asked. "Not a damn clue. We'll probably get told at our briefing," I said. "Could put the monitors on," Yunk suggested. I nodded at Gruff to go ahead as we felt the ship come out of warp. Same sensation, but backwards. Hell of a feeling, but it's very fleeting and will only bother you if you focus on it too hard. Gruff got up and tapped one of the mirrors a couple of times, and it changed to an external view of the ship. I always thought this was a better idea than the glass windows you see on bougie shuttles. "This looks like Alpha Centauri, I'm pretty sure," CPL Chang chimed in. "Yeah, there's the shipyards." "But, hey, Sarnt, could you activate the highlights?" LCPL Livingston asked. "I'm not your fucking remote, Marine," SGT Gruff growled as he tapped the screen again. "Yeah, there we go. We're definitely in Alpha Centauri. All the shipyards, and nowhere else are you going to see that many other ships." "Wait." Chang trailed off. I looked at the screen a bit closer, and it took a moment to realize that the ships that were highlighted weren't the typical civilian ships that you'd normally see. There were carriers and battleships far more than there should be. Even if we had rendezvoused with the rest of Second Fleet, there wouldn't be this many. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I could count them. But we were looking at our grouping plus 3 others with a fuck ton of ships per grouping. "Hey, Staff Sergeant, you ever seen more than one fleet in the same place at the same time?" Gruff asked. "Nope," I said. "Yeah, me neither." "What's going on?" PFC Rogers asked with a bit of fear in his voice. "Time to be a leader." "Who gives a fuck? It ain't none of our damned business until it's made our business, Marine," I said with a knife hand for emphasis and more than a little impatience. "Gruff, turn it back to mirror mode. The rest of you back to sweating." The rest of our workout was quiet. Nobody said a word even when we hit the showers. Nervous Marines are a bad thing to be around. When someone who has been trained to efficiently end a life without hesitation gets nervous, so does everyone around them. This was evident by the silence from everyone that we passed. Either that or they knew more than we did and were nervous too. We got to the briefing, and I made certain everyone sat in the proper order, highest to lowest by rank in alphabetical order, with top ranks up front. I glanced around. The entire company was here, all 10 squads, right around 130 Marines. There was a low murmur in the room as we waited for the CO to take the podium. You could tell everyone was nervous because it's normally about 20 decibels louder. Didn't usually get quiet until someone shouted, "Officer on deck!" Everyone shut up. stood up at attention, and saluted as our battalion CO Colonel Hammerstein and company CO Captain Michaels entered the room, followed by some officers from the Navy, one of which was Captain Young, commander of the Liberty. The other, if I remember my ranks right, is an admiral. Shit. The officers took the stage and returned our salute. The sound of 130-some-odd hands snapping back down was pretty satisfying. "At ease, take your seats," Hammerstein began. "The current time is 0759, and we're beginning your mission brief. Good morning, Marines." "Good morning, sir." First, introductions. You all know Captain Michaels, hopefully. He laughed a little and continued with a gesture to the naval officers. "This is Captain Young of the USSS Liberty and Admiral Archibald, commander of 2nd Fleet. They will be observing and assisting with this briefing." Oorah! Oorah! A screen lit up behind the colonel with images of a grouping of alien ships. We'll begin with some context. This is the Republic, or their ships, rather. 16 days ago, one of their ships performed a blind warp into Sol after taking heavy damage and began emitting an SOS. That ship is the Republic space vessel Loalana, which means something like "fights with honor," he began. The screen changed to show different alien ships, including technical schematics. "This is the Omni Union. While the USSS Thanatos and USSS Valor were attempting to rescue the RSV Loalana, 2 OU destroyers entered Sol and attacked the Valor. These destroyers were terminated with prejudice." Oorah, oorah. During the very brief fight, the Valor accepted a hail from one of the vessels, assuming they were surrendering and begging aid. The Valor came under cyber attack and briefly lost control of their systems, nearly firing upon the Loalana before their crew could be rescued. Thankfully, AI Tim was aboard to aid with the rescue and was able to fend off the attack. It was at this point we were able to determine that the Omni Union is a virtual intelligence collective, VIC, a soon-to-be fitting acronym, Oorah? Oorah! Soon after the crew of the Loalana was rescued, a small fleet of 20 OU ships entered Sol and began attacking. The Valor was able to escape the ambush and took out 6 OU ships before returning to the Thanatos. They would have taken out more, but the Omni Union deployed a warp disruption technology dissimilar to what we've seen before. The Thanatos deployed its other frigates, which cleaned up the rest of this fleet. 10 days ago, we made diplomatic contact with the Republic and they pledged a defense fleet for Sol. 7 days ago, the Omni Union attacked Sol again with over 500 ships. Part of 10th Fleet had been deployed to Sol for defense and was able to successfully defend the system. Oorah, oorah. Since then, 4th Fleet has taken over the defense of Sol and Republic forces have arrived to fortify that defense. Admiral Archibald will take it from here, Colonel Hammerstein finished. The colonel and the admiral exchanged salutes as Archibald took the podium. "Good morning, Marines," the admiral began with a smile. "Good morning, sir. As some of you may have noticed, we are currently in Alpha Centauri, along with 3rd, 5th, 7th, 8th, and 9th Fleets. Intelligence has identified 2 things. The first is a target, an enemy stronghold that we plan to take for further intelligence gathering." He paused for a moment and then continued. "The second is damning evidence that the enemy is xenocidal." The images on the screen changed to pictures of slaughtered aliens with tentacles for mouths, and a deep silence fell over the room. Some Marines were probably contemplating the stakes. Others were probably remembering the history of the Deluran War. Most were probably thinking of their families, like me. A beautiful wife, son, and daughter were waiting for me back on Alaris Station. I felt my face involuntarily scowl at the thought of harm coming to them. I didn't have to look around to know that the faces surrounding me mirrored my own. I want to be absolutely clear, Marines. We won't know what to expect on the ground until we get in system, and we may not have enough time to share that intel with you before we have to get you on the dirt. This is going to be high stakes. But you've trained for this. You're the tip of the spear. There isn't a single trooper in this universe who can go toe-to-toe with a United Systems Marine. We don't know if the enemy can fear. We don't know if the enemy can feel pain. But you're sure as shit going to find out, Archibald said with a slam of his fist on the podium. Oorah! Captain Michaels will outline your part of the mission, he said, and stepped away from the podium. Captain Michaels stepped up to the podium and said, I want your complete attention and silence until I finish with this brief. Our company has been tasked with escorting AI Omega planetside. The screen changed from the dead aliens to an image of a black crate with antennas and such sticking out of it. These devices will be Omega's lifeline. The AI will be jumping from box to box as it attacks the Omni Union inside their own systems. Omega will also be gathering much-needed intel as it goes. These boxes must survive. Your mission is to escort the box to the surface, protect it, and escort it back to exfil. Omega will be in communication with you and may give further orders as things develop. If it says to move, you move. If it says to bark like a dog, it better be the best impression of a canine you've ever done. To be absolutely crystal clear, Omega outranks everyone in this room. The screen changed once again to show a view of a solar system. There are 5 Omni-Union planets: OU Alpha, OU Bravo, OU Charlie, OU Delta, and OU Echo, he said, as the screen highlighted each planet with their designation. We'll be going in alphabetical order: land, dig in, defend, and exfil. To piggyback off of what Admiral Archibald said, we don't have any intel regarding enemy defenses, positions, or even our landing zones. And we won't until we get there. The only thing that we do know is that the Omni-Union DO have foot soldiers that are mechanical and use directed energy weapons. These lasers are expected to be weaker than our own, but you'd be foolish to count on that. Omega will attempt to provide you with intel as we gain it. But remember that Omega has its own mission. Keep your head down and blow off the enemies, and we'll all go home happy. This operation will commence when our fleets are back up to full strength. We'll let you know before we jump. The screen shut off, and Captain Michaels stepped away from the podium. Colonel Hammerstein stepped back up to the podium. Marines! I-10, huh? All of us stood to the position of attention, like we'd done so many times before. Dismissed,